agenda item 4C. And first of all, I've been asked to kind of clarify what's the difference between 4C and agenda item number 5. Currently, the board is obligated to approve schools providing curriculum for training registered veterinary technicians. And in order to specify the approval criteria, we have in our regulations a certain set of criteria that must be met by these schools. On that list, there are certain things that are exempt if a school has AVMA accreditation, but on that list are certain things that are not exempt and must still be reported to the board for approval. So at the last meeting, it was requested that this board send out an application form to all the RVT programs in California to comply with those exempted items. And an update on that process is what agenda item number 5 is. What agenda item 4C is also a follow-up that this board requested legal counsel's opinion on whether or not those exemptions could be, those items that are not exempted could also be exempted. So that RVT program that is certified by the AVMA can be deemed as board approved. I might point out that we do have 2 schools of veterinary medicine in this state that this board approves as board approved once they've achieved AVMA accreditation. So in a sense, the RT programs are asked to be met at a higher standard than the veterinary schools are. And one has to think about our ultimate mandate of that being of consumer protection. And when we talk about consumer protection, that does also include RVT students and veterinary students. But our current structure to make these programs comply to these other rules, is that truly going to result, is that going to rise the level of consumer protection in any significant manner? Or is it just duplication of service that is resulting in a utilization of our staff's time, which could be used in other places? So that's the distinction between the two, some things to think about as we're debating this. And with that, I'll turn over item 4C, the analysis from legal on changing our current regulations.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. One of my first assignments when I acquired this board was there was some discussion about some kind of the dual or perhaps redundant reporting requirements under the current regulatory and statutory scheme. And upon some further diving into it, I was kind of scratching my head because I wasn't quite sure what the dual reporting requirements were. And that question kind of morphed into sort of, the board and essentially relies upon, for some things, they have AVMA accreditation, but not all things. And there was some perhaps confusion about what was required, and there's also some statements by the various board staff about what actually the process was. So I tried to answer the question, and knowing the question that I was trying to answer was being, could the board rely just on AVMA accreditation as deeming those schools approved by the board? And I think the answer to that is yes. And I must temper that a little bit by whenever, as we have the statutory obligation of whenever the board exercises its licensing, disciplinary, or regulatory, i.e. regulations function, consumer protection is its paramount priority. And so the tension I had was conceivably there would be some administrative efficiency gained if you could just rely on AVA accreditation. You wouldn't have to review an application, you wouldn't have to send out letters, you wouldn't have to intake in the mailroom, all that sort of stuff. On one hand. On the other hand, or perhaps the contravening force would be, is there a loss in consumer protection? And so to answer that last part of it, because I don't actually work in the mailroom or work in the intake function of the board, I thought I would rely on the chart that I think Mr. Mathis and staff had done about the comparison between what our regulations say and what AVA accreditation stands for. And it looks to me, if I can decipher this chart right, I don't see it. I did not see a palpable loss in consumer protection. And so with that in mind, and again, I'm not the decision maker, I propose on page 2 that if this board wanted to rely on AVA accreditation, it could solely. That's not to say that every school had to get AVA accreditation. It's just one way to get certification. So that's kind of where I left it. Again, I don't make any, the prudence, the policy option is that left to the board. There was some, I think perhaps your previous council had suggested directly or implicitly that perhaps the whole scale reliance or delegation to another agency might be improper because there's no parameters set by the legislature. That is a potential risk. However, given your statutory and regulatory scheme, it seems that a person that, even if you didn't graduate from a school, you could still come to the board and be granted an RVT licensure, by the analysis method of your curriculum and your expertise. So I don't see that as being an intolerable risk. So that what you see here is before you is just a slight modification to 2064. Which is to say the board, if it wanted to, could rely on AVA accreditation as a way of approving the school. And so that's the answer that I will leave you with. I'll be happy to entertain any questions in that regard.
I'd also like to point out that the options that you gave us doesn't remove our authority to disapprove programs.
Correct.
And inspect them.
Correct.
Okay.
So this, Mr. Chairman and President, if I just elaborate, this would essentially reduce the number of questions a school and the board had to answer. If somebody came up to the door and knocked on the door and said, how do I become an approved program, you could answer it in one of two ways. You could say, you can get approved by us, or you could be AVMA accredited, and then we would essentially deem you approved. So that's kind of the question that I was trying to answer. And again, the ultimate policy option, after weighing the pros and cons, is up to the board. My task was to offer a legal opinion and provide a mechanism by which you could get there if you so chose.
Dr. Sullivan?
Yeah, I would agree with Mark, your first comment, that we already have a template in place with accrediting veterinary schools, and if we go with option 1, I think it parallels that and still gives the option of facilities or programs that don't want to go through the AVMA accreditation route. They still have a way of getting our approval. So I think it's, I just think it's a practical way of addressing the issue and still providing consumer protection at the same levels we have for the veterinary programs.
And I would also like to again point out that by doing this, we're not going to lose any standards of accreditation that the RVTC committee established back in 2006. None of those requirements that they felt was appropriate is going to be lost if we take this option as the comparison chart chart shows. All of those items are covered with AVMA accreditation.
I have not been on a AVMA accreditation program, but I have talked to others that have. It's very thorough. It's a multi-day program. It's a lot of work. And they do ask CVMA for volunteers to be on that program. We do have some difficulty, or CVMA does have some difficulty at times filling those positions. So I think, we need to get the word out when those positions come up to get people on there. I just think they do a very good job, and I don't think we need the duplication of effort.
Yeah, and I have served on one of those site visits, those accreditation for the RDT program at Pierce College. It was a 3-day inspection. I can't think of any question that was not asked about the program on it, so.
How many new schools come online? Is it in a year, in 5 years? In the last 5 years, how many new schools?
Ethan, would you be able to answer the data on how many new schools that you're aware of that have come online in the last 5 years?
No.
That are not alternate route schools?
It would probably be a handful. There is one that is trying to get AVMA accreditation that I'm aware of, but
not many.
it's not a lot. There's 19 schools total, and you get a sprinkling throughout the years.
I didn't think it was many. And then, does the AVMA do the initial inspection of the hospital? Or the school? Physical inspection, walkthrough, blah, blah, blah?
Well, certainly if they're going through the accreditation, yeah,
They're
that's my understanding.
on site. They're
Yes,
on
that's my
site.
understanding.
Okay.
There's also an additional approval that private schools have to get from the Bureau of Private Post-Secondary Education. I don't know anything about that approval process, but
As former counsel to BPPE, that is an approval that can take some time, but it really goes to some of the consumer protection elements, like you need to have an enrollment agreement. You need to, here's the cost. You've been making contributions potentially in the state student tuition reimbursement fund. Here's how much that's going to cost. Here's how much your anticipated costs are for books. All the data regarding perhaps placement in the field once you graduate. All that is a requirement of BPPE accreditation approval. I'm sorry. So it is for a private institution. It's something that is comprehensive and is valuable. Yes.
So if it's private, they have to go through AVMA and BPPE? Is that what, but if it's not private, then it's just AVMA?
Or the board. So
Right, okay.
any school, I think of it kind of like a pie chart. So any school can get approved by board approval or by AVMA accreditation if this were adopted. You have one extra ingredient in the pie if you're a private school, because then you require BPPE.
Thank you. We've been talking about BPE for a while, and I wondered when they kicked in, and you just answered they're private. Okay.
Can I request clarification since I'm new to this issue? By private, do you mean anything other than a sort of University of California, Cal State, or is there some other category of difference? Because then most of these schools would be private, except the ones run out of community colleges.
Junior college, yeah.
Okay.
Junior college.
Okay, so that's the only distinction you're making. Okay.
Can I ask a question? It says that there's one paragraph that approval under this section shall automatically terminate upon loss of accreditation by the AVMA. How do we know when a school is at risk or does lose their accreditation? Is that part of the statute for the AVMAs?
Yeah, they communicate to the programs in the individual states. So this isn't unique to California. They communicate to the state, the governing, whether it's a licensing board, what have you, from state to state, whether they revoke or remove accreditation from a school in that state.
And what's the time frame for that?
The last I spoke with them, it's usually they try to inform the state before the actual revocation, so the state's aware that it's coming, but no later than 60 days.
As far as, and then the other thing we discussed a lot was about the reporting requirements, and that there was overlap in some, and I know I looked at the chart, which was extensive, whoever did all that work, Ethan, thank
Not me.
you.
It was Nina did. Nina.
She's
Finger.
just rocking it out. So, except for on the lunch order. No, I know it wasn't your fault. I'm kidding. No, she knows I'm kidding. So anyhow, but here's my question is, it's great that AVMA is the body that they are, that they can do all this and have the resources and whatnot. But as far as reporting goes, I think Nancy had brought up, and she'll probably come up and speak to it if I'm right or wrong, I don't know, that they weren't always, the schools weren't always disclosing data that they should be disclosing per the AVMA rules, but no one is policing them and they're not policing themselves. No one's enforcing these mandatory reporting requirements. So maybe when a public comment, I don't know if it's,
We have an answer to that already.
okay.
So schools are required to report their exam scores on their individual websites.
Yes, they are.
That's an AVMA accreditation standard. There was some question as to this 10% rule that's currently in regs, that their exam scores can't fall below like 10% average. And there's some clarity that's needed in the regs because that once spoke to the California practical exam for RVTs, which is now a jurisprudence exam if we're talking about the California exam, or are we talking about the VT&E, which would be the national exam. It's unclear in regs because the regs in that section haven't kept pace with where we are today. So that's probably going to need some cleanup. But we have access to VT&E scores by school, and we also have access to our California scores by school. So it's something that Ethan reports. The VT&E scores we're just starting to report moving forward, but the California school score reports are already on our website.
So if you cannot find it on the school's website, you're gonna find it on our site because we collect the data and we put it up there. Okay, that's interesting, thank you.
The VT&E data isn't up there today because we had to request access to their portal to get that data. So VT&E, the national exam. Because it's not our exam.
That's correct.
So we wouldn't collect the passing rates on that exam. It's a national exam. But we did get access through the AAVSB, the American Association of Veterinary State Boards, access to the VT&E exam results. And they are currently, with Ethan's help, modifying how that's displayed so that in California, it's going to make sense. It's by school and it's by mean and deviation and all of that.
Yeah, because I think if I'm gonna spend whatever it costs, $40,000 to go through the school, I wanna know, is it a good program, are they graduating people, are they getting good test scores, are they learning the material, and that needs to be out there.
Not only that, remember it's a requirement for the school to be on the school's website as well.
And
Okay.
it was requested that this board post on our website the VT&E scores, which we are a responsive board, and we're in the process of doing that. The reason why it's not up already is there needs to be a clarification of programs,
How they're identified.
how they're
at school.
identified. So, thank you, Kirk, for presenting that. So if that's legal, that's the legal opinion of considering amending the regulations. So if anyone would like to make a motion on possibly moving forward with the two options that Kirk had presented, then now would be the time to do so.
I move that we adopt option one.
Just, may I make it clarifying, so this would be sort of similar to what we did last time, and this would be to commence the rulemaking process as well. Set it, not, since the board does things a little different than I'm used to, but you would certainly initiate the 45-day comment period, but not necessarily set a hearing unless the board wanted to.
I know there's going to be public comment, but we have Nancy here who was a member of the RBTC, so I'd like to hear her thoughts on this also before I decide which option I'd like to.
Okay, so we have a motion, but we don't have a second.
I will second the motion in order to facilitate forward discussion.
Yeah.
So it's been motioned and seconded, and now we're continuing with our comments. Is there any further questions from the board at this point? Is there any questions from the audience?
I'm not quite sure exactly where to begin, other than perhaps I'll start with the comparison chart. You're relying on this data to say that AVMA reporting is equivalent to California reporting, and therefore there would be no loss of consumer protection if you went to automatically approve AVMA schools. Well, that is incorrect information. Our regulation requires that students be given, prospective students be given literature prior to enrollment, which outlines their pass rate, which outlines their transferability of units. AVMA regulations require that that information be posted on the website, not that it be given to prospective students, and literature handed to prospective students. So that in itself is a diminution of protection of the consumer, because a person has to be proactive in order to go to the website. They have to know that there is the information on the website. I went myself to the website, and this information is, some of the information is there, but it is not obvious or easily found by a person who is not necessarily computer savvy, which is why when the RBT committee wrote these regulations, we wanted to make sure that these students were given this information proactively. They didn't have to ask for it. It was handed to them. There's a huge difference between the 2 veterinary schools in California and the 19 schools, the RVT schools. The vast majority of the RVT schools now in California are proprietary, for-profit schools, and I'm sure you've all been watching the news about for-profit schools and their poor reputation. Most of the schools in California are Carrington colleges, which charge somewhere between $35,000 and $40,000 for an RVT program. I went to the website of 3 of those schools just to see if the information that AVMA requires them to post was actually posted. And I was very surprised by some of the information that I found. In the calendar year 2013, this was the Carrington College Citrus Heights campus. The number of students who began the program, 59. Graduates, 10. Completion rate, 16.9%. Calendar year 2014, 57 students, graduates 15, completion rate 26.3%. The refund policy in these schools is that if you complete more than 50% of the program, you lose your entire tuition fee. They have data on placement rates, how many people were employed. Students who began the program in 2013, 59 started the program. How many graduates were employed in the field? 9. 59 started, 9 ended up being employed. The statistics shows 90% employment rate. So of the 9 that were eligible for employment, 90% of them were employed. As we all know, RVTs are very much in demand, so anyone who becomes an RVT actually gets a job, but only 9 out of the 59 who started the program actually were eligible for employment. Now we come to the pass rates, which they're required to post on their website. We require that the student be given this information prospectively. AVMA requires it be on their website. I can show you this material. Examination passage rates for licensure examinations not continuously administered, and that would be the VTNE. Number of students taking the exam, not applicable. Exam date, not applicable. Number who passed the exam, not applicable. Number who failed the exam, not applicable. Passage rate, not applicable. License examination passage rates, continually administered examinations, and it's the same, not applicable, not applicable. There are no figures in those columns. All three schools, the same thing. No figures in the columns for percentage passage rate. So students, even if they have the wherewithal to go to the website to look for the passage rate, they can't find it because it's not there. AVMA is obviously not enforcing this rule of theirs. I spoke to somebody at AVMA about the 10% rule, and I said, you know, in California, we have this rule that if a school falls below 10% the average pass rate for 2 years, and they're put on probation. I said, do you have such a rule? She says, that's very interesting. She says, no, we don't have such a rule. I said, we do inform the school that they need to do something, but we don't have a rule that puts them on probation. So again, this would be a loss of consumer protection if you automatically allow AVMA schools to be approved, because the schools that are falling below the 10% pass rate would not be put on probation. And now if you look at the pass rates on the VTNE overall, in California, the pass rate now in the most recent administration was 50%. We don't know yet which schools they are because they haven't been put, you might know, but I don't know because I'm not privy to those statistics yet. But that's pretty shocking that the pass rate is only 50%. And when students are paying $40,000 for their education and only 50% are passing the VTNE, that's an enormous problem for them. And of course, it's an enormous problem for the citizens of the United States because most of these people are taking out federal loans, and they also have statistics on failure to pay back the loans. I have some of that here, and there's a very high failure rate in passing. I don't know where I saw that, but anyway, I found that somewhere. There was something like a 66% failure to pay back student loans. Probably a lot of them are the people who are not passing and not graduating and not becoming RVTs, and so they can't even afford to pay back their student loans. So I strongly recommend against this proposal, and I think that the application that is going to be coming up in the next discussion is excellent. You've done an excellent job of coming up with an application that's extremely easy for the schools to fill out. It doesn't require a lot of office time looking at the application, and it protects the California students from this kind of a problem where 16%, 26% are actually graduating from the schools. And we don't even know we don't have any statistics on Carrington College, what percentage are actually those who complete the schools, whether they're passing the exam or not. So while the facilities may be wonderful, when you go through and you look at the inspection team goes through the school and it looks good, the instructors might be good, the curriculum might be good, but because these are for-profit institutions, their incentive is to accept anybody who comes to them and says, I want to go to this school. They don't have an incentive to reject people who are not qualified. And that's, I think, the big problem here, that they are taking people who are not qualified, who are very unlikely to be able to succeed in the program, and their own statistics prove the point, that they drop out. The vast majority of students who start the program drop out. So I think the other states, that's their business. But California we have traditionally had very high standards, and it'd be shocking to me if you would just give up control and allow this to go on without any sort of oversight in California.
Okay.
And I don't disagree with those figures at all, but I don't see that we're abdicating our responsibility in the part of this comment still, or part of the, I believe it's the existing regulation is still there that says nothing in this section shall be construed to prohibit the board from disapproving or withdrawing approval from a school or degree program not complying with the requirements, et cetera, et cetera. So if a public member would file a complaint to the board saying that this school is not complying because they don't have the pass rate that you're quoting, then I think it would behoove the board to investigate that and remove their accreditation if it was sound.
Exactly, but isn't it also part of your job to prevent problems? I mean, we were trying to prevent problems by requiring prospective literature being given to the candidates so that 67% or whatever of the students wouldn't end up dropping out before they completed the program. That they would look at the pass rate before they ever went into the program. They would know what they were getting into before they got into the program. So that's what I'm concerned about, that these naive students, everybody loves animals. Oh, my mother wants me to get a job. I got to go work. I guess I'll become an RVT because I like animals. And then they go to Carrington College, and Carrington College says, you know, this is a great program. You know, RVTs, everybody who applies for a job gets one. Well, that's true, but first you got to graduate from the program, and second you have to pass the exam. And if the students are not aware of that information, they naively go into these programs, they get themselves $40,000 in debt, and then they don't become RVTs.
Sure, Nancy, may I ask a question? So Nancy, is the one difference that you're seeing between what we currently have in place and what might happen if we went to AVMA approval as the sole criteria, the absence of the provision of literature to students? I'm just trying to be clear what you feel would be lost.
That's basically what's lost, those three things, that the student is not given prospectively information on pass rates, and the other thing is transferability units. I went on multiple inspections and had people tell me, well, after I finish this Western Career College, I'm going to go to veterinary school. And not one of the units that they were obtaining in Western Career College was going to be applicable toward veterinary school. So this is where we came up with the idea that they needed to understand this information, and it needs to be prospective because they don't know to ask that question.
If we were to actively provide students with this information, how would we even know who they are?
It's the requirement of the intake person when the person goes to interview at Carrington College or at any other one of the schools, when they say, I'm considering applying to this school, our regulation requires them to hand the student a piece of information that says, here's some information that you need before you sign up for this program.
I think Kurt has an answer to that question.
So again, I'm a bit perplexed. First of all, I'm reviewing the regulations. I'm not sure what loan default rate has, even if we didn't do this, I'm not sure what loan default rate has to do with board approval, unless I'm missing it. Is that?
That's not my main issue. The main issue was pass rates and dropping out of the school.
Okay, so then it's my understanding that what you're speaking of is mostly private institutions?
Correct. Those are the problematic programs. The community college programs don't have these problems.
Okay, so members, it's my understanding that even now, even if we don't do anything, the BPP approval is still required for private institutions. And I can tell you that the information that you're talking about is required in the enrollment agreement and other informational literature to get BPP approval. So to the extent that we talk about dropout, again, I'm assuming that what we're talking about realistically is the delta, preserved delta, that's lost in consumer protection between what we do now and this approval. That's what we're really talking about, is the delta. And so I guess what I'm saying is, even if we do this and we're talking about approval of a private institution, the BPP process is still required. Approval is still required. So I did not, just to clear the record, when I said is about the equivalency, was that there'd be no appreciable or demonstrable loss in consumer protection. I have two teenage daughters that are probably the most technically savvy people that I ever know. I can barely get my toaster to work. And so I think to suggest that a student would not be savvy enough, assuming that the BP approval did not give them the information not to go on the website, I'm not sure that's a reasonable conclusion.
Nancy, can we see? What's on the website? Excuse me, sorry. I just thought maybe she could pass those around while you talk about what's on the website, because she printed out what's on the website.
And may I respond to Kurt's comments, which I really appreciate, and the BPP stuff I'm not familiar with. I think what Nancy's identifying, and I think it is a legitimate concern in this country with for-profit education, is the naive consumer who does not even know to go look and ask. And the requirement, and maybe the BPP does this, so that might address the problem, that you answer a question that hasn't been asked by providing the consumer with education, with information they didn't know they needed, is what we're getting at here.
Right, so as former BP counsel, they have, and if you want to just take a moment, I'll go get it, about what they require. So they have definitive, comprehensive information about what's required in advertising, what's required in the enrollment agreement. And that's the fundamental document that makes everything go. That's what you sign up for, that's what you put, that's when your costs are thing, that's when your perspective about how you're going to be employed, all that. And again, we're talking about private institutions. And so, like I said, why don't, Mr. Chairman, if you'll indulge me, why don't you move on to another item perhaps, and I will go get BPE's requirements, and I'll return in a few moments.
I have a question, no matter what the requirements say. I think part of what I'm hearing, I don't know, but looking at what's on their website, they have all this NAs where it's like the most important data. So even if I'm your daughter and I go to that website, the data's not there.
Correct.
So I'm wondering with option 1 or 2, either one, I mean, if they fall below 10%, we can tell them, hey, we're gonna take your accreditation away, but if they don't post what they're supposed to be posting, what is our enforcement mechanism to make them post what they're supposed to post in the event that someone is tech savvy enough to go find the data? Not even that whole, give it to them before they ask stuff.
First of all, I disagree that you have to be tech savvy to find something on it. I mean, I also have a college-age daughter. My son is 14.
I'm
He
just
knows how to
going
go on a
with
website
Kurt.
and find information. So
Because Kurt
that
can't
aside,
use his toaster.
that aside,
It's a flaw.
if a school is failing to meet their accreditation standards, thereby failing to meet our program approval standards because they're supposed to be equivalent. So part of this is deeming the recognition of accreditation being that of substantially equitable to what we have for board approval. That would be a complaint. And the board has every right, obligation, and opportunity to investigate that, just like we would anything else. So the schools that aren't reporting their exam scores, that should be reported to AVMA that there's no exam scores on their websites. So I don't know how unique this is or how pervasive it is, but it is something we should look at. We should go on the sites and look at what they're reporting. Now, clearly, in Agenda Item 5, we've asked for them to provide us that data by virtue of that application. But that doesn't, even if we don't ask for an application, that doesn't somehow prevent us from enforcing that that's one of the approval standards of accreditation and board approval in the state of California.
Okay, I'm gonna cut it off right now. I consider myself to be college age. Because I don't have a college age son or daughter, but what I think Kurt has left the room to go follow up on things. And, I would just like to say that this board is responsible for making sure that these RVT programs meet a certain standard. And I would ask the board members to consider whether or not we want to utilize our resources to ensure that AVMA is doing what they say they're going to be doing when they accredit these programs, and also utilizing our resource to ensure that the BPPE is also doing what they're supposed to be doing. Is that a good utilization of our resources? And to answer that question, maybe we'll find the answer when we get the results from agenda item number 5, which I would suggest that we kind of table agenda item 4C because it's been motioned and seconded, and I'm not gonna call for a vote until Kurt brings back that information. But I think that we can move on to agenda item number 5, which may answer that question. Is it resulting in a loss of any consumer protection by not doing what currently is in our regulations?
Mr. Chairman, when I come back to this item, I would like to be recognized to speak on this as well.
Okay, so we're coming off of item 4C and moving on to agenda item number 5.
Let me speak.
Which is an
So,
update on
are you ready?
what our current regulation says.
So as we've stated, the board asked staff to prepare an application and submit this application to various California State RBT AVMA accredited programs back in April. We worked with council in May to do that and sent the applications out on May 31st to all 19 schools. On the application, we asked that they respond to the board within 60 days and also noted that the board would respond to the programs in turn within 60 days of receipt of their application. The application is included in your packet for your review. I have gotten about 4 return applications within the last week or so. I've also fielded several really good phone calls from programs asking about the application, and they've all been very responsive to providing the necessary information to the board. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Yes.
Is the staff, since we're coming up on the 60-day, or maybe we passed it, is the staff following up with the schools that haven't to
Yeah,
request
so
their submission?
the 60 days will end July 31st. Yes,
Yeah.
we intend to follow up with them if we don't get a response back.
Okay.
Oh, and one thing I did not mention, in October, because we have not had the chance to vet the applications, I'll be providing a comprehensive report to the board at that time, the October meeting on this item.
I'd like to recognize Ethan for his work on the application and compiling the data, and he did a really good job of formulating this application, simplifying it, and making it really user-friendly on both ends.
Can I ask one more question? Did you say you sent them to 19?
Yes, that's correct.
RBT schools? Okay, thank you.
How much time did this take?
I figured you might ask me that. I don't know. 20, 40 hours? It's hard to say. I mean, I spent better part of a couple weeks back and forth. We worked with council, did the normal research, so it took some time.
Several weeks.
I mean, not full time, but yeah, it took some working on, for sure.
How many of the 19 are private and how many are public?
I do not have that figure. I can find out for you, though.
But it's on our website,
Yes,
Yeah.
all the programs are linked
Yeah.
to on our website.
and we can get it before tomorrow. It's primarily, or for the most part, it's private institutions. There's a few public institutions.
Yeah, I spoke to a few junior colleges.
Yeah.
Carrington and Platt are some of the bigger ones. They have several locations.
Yeah, it's on our website.
So, given what you said, Mark, Dr. Nunez, and reading this, I mean, I don't think that we want to use our resources to do what AVMA's resources can do, but we also can't put all of our eggs in their basket and just hope for the best that they're doing everything they should. I think there should still be auditing, we should still be reviewing websites and making sure the data's there that should be there,
Now,
right?
so which section of these 17 sections is going to tell a student not to go to a certain school because they probably won't pass the program or they probably won't pass the test? Which number is going to tell us that?
As far as the disclosure requirements, is that what you're asking? Well, 15 reviews disclosure requirements, 16 reviews disclosure requirements. And these are basically copy and pasted from the language of the requirement from the law itself.
And then is the intention for us to take that information and proactively give it to students that are potentially applying to these programs?
Well, they're required to give it to the students. So they're going to prove to us how they're doing that.
Right, that's where they're not fulfilling their part.
We obviously have a backlog in this area. We recognize it and we're addressing it. And I would say that when, or I guess I should say if and when, we recognize a school that is not meeting that demand and we remove their state accreditation, I think others will fall in line very quickly. That's part of the process of discipline for any state or any organization. If we're not enforcing it or able to enforce it, it's not going to be followed. But if we start enforcing it, I think if they're going to stay in business, they're going to comply, and that's what we need to do.
I've got a question. So I'd hate to see a loss of accreditation. This was my question before, but I don't think I got an answer. So if we see this Carrington with all their NAs, okay, they're breaking the AVMA's regulations, they're breaking ours, they should have it up on their website. Now, we send them a letter. This is what I'm assuming happens, and you guys tell me what really happens. I would think we would send them a letter, it's brought to our attention. Dear Carrington, you're in violation of the regulations, AVMA, California Veterinary Practice Act. Get your data up by such and such time, or what? Do you get a penalty first? Then do you lose your accreditation? What happens? What is the current existing path for enforcement? Anne Marie, did you hear any of that?
I did. So you're asking what happens if we get a complaint and we move?
Yeah,
forward?
how do you?
We would send a site review team out probably, depending on what the.
Well, you wouldn't need to, because it's the website and we've got the stuff right in front of us. So if it's just, let's just take it the reporting, something simple.
Yeah.
Got these things right on their website, we could pull it up right now, bunch of NAs, the data ought to be there. What do we do next?
Well, we do, but what we would do next is investigate and ask, why isn't the information up there? So it's just like what we deal with at the Veterinary Medical Board. Do we have a breeze issue where you transition to a new database and suddenly you can't get the information? Was there a problem with the reporting information on a national level getting to the schools so that they can report it? So we couldn't make a determination just based on, okay, for whatever reason it's not on the website today. We'd actually inquire, why aren't you reporting these scores? If it comes back that the schools have not been reporting the scores and they're in violation, we would report that to AVMA as well because they hold accreditation through AVMA. We would also probably send some form of corrective action. That being, either you report the schools,
Right.
you go on probation, or if you don't comply and you don't respond with compliance, you will pull your approval.
And that's what I would have expected the answer to be is, I don't really care why the data's not up there. You know the data needs to be there because you are AVMA approved, you're a state of California approved. The data's missing, it's supposed to be there. You've got 30 days, get the data up, or we're gonna ding you, whatever ding means. It could be money and another set of time that then you're gonna go away from your accreditation and you're gonna get penalized further. Do we have that enforcement plan in place? Is that in place, or is that something we should be doing as we vote and then you guys go and put these things in place, or is that already in place?
The only thing I can answer is we have the authority to do it. Since I've been here, we haven't taken action against a school.
Okay.
Now,
As
the
long
other,
as we're still talking about this, can I come up and talk? I can
well, let me finish
add a
answering
lot
the
to all of
question
this.
and
Okay.
then it's up to the board president.
Okay, good.
So let's not get out of order. The other thing that I did want to answer is your question about, what is our role?
Yeah.
Even if we recognize accreditation, that doesn't remove our responsibility. And I think that's been the disconnect, is that suddenly we say they're accredited, so the board's completely hands-off, we don't care what happens to these schools. That's not true. And I don't know if you can draw the parallel between students dropping out and the fact that the program is not a quality program. We can't take responsibility for why the students remain in the schools and why they drop out. You can look at any state college, you could look at any university, and they don't have a completely stellar, retention rate or graduation rate. I mean, that's true for, the University of California. There's a lot of factors that go into why a student matriculates and why they don't. And maybe they are transferring out, I don't know. But you did ask a question about how many public and how many private. So I just went onto our website. There's 4 public. The remainder are private RBT schools.
So BPP is part of DCA, correct?
Yes.
So they have enforcement capability. So anybody, a private or anybody, could complain to BP&E about these private schools. And so we could let their enforcement take over as well, right?
That was kind of my next question. If there is a concern, why hasn't CARFTA filed a complaint to the BPE or to the board about a certain school that they perceived as being bad?
CARFTA's been dealing with the Veterinary Medical Board and has authority over approval of schools, and we're expecting the Veterinary Medical Board to do its job.
No, specifically, why haven't you filed, it sounds like there's certain schools that you're not happy with, so.
I just did this research for this meeting because it's on this topic.
All right. Okay. All right, so, again, so item number 5 is just is an update on where we're at with this. It probably would be a very interesting report that we get back in October.
I hope so.
And this report potentially can tell us some schools that are not in compliance with what they should be doing,
It would if that's the case, yes.
if that's the case.
Mhm.
Can I ask Ethan a question? You have 4 reports back, you said. How long on average are these? Are they 50 pages? Are they, 2?
50 pages.
Okay.
I talked to one program that, because I had asked for their most recent documents they've submitted to AVMA for their continuing accreditation. A couple of programs have reported that it's quite a thick document.
Yeah.
So that alone is a lot of paperwork, but the rest is,
Okay.
dozens of pages.
I would point, when I was reading number 14 on this document, it says, provide evidence the program is in compliance with all laws regulating the practice of veterinary medicine. I'm not sure how I would attack that. And so
I've
are
had
they
that question.
asking that
Yeah,
question?
yeah,
I
I've
mean,
had that question.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah.
tricky one. That's straight from the regulation. I've asked that they're signing this document. They're certifying this document is true and correct, and I've asked that they let us know, basically certify themselves that they're following those things. And I think that'll be borne out by the evidence they submit in their application for the other items.
So,
Thank you.
Yeah, you're
It's
welcome.
taking you the better part of several weeks to make the application. How much time do you anticipate it will be to analyze all the applications you get back?
I'll let you know in January, because I probably won't be done. No, I don't know. I don't know. I have no way of knowing that. I mean,
Yeah. I
a
mean,
couple weeks at least.
sometimes you have to ask yourself, there's only so much we can do. When we set standards for the practice of veterinary medicine, are we going into each and every veterinary hospital and ensuring all those standards are applied? It seems like it's a monumental task. I'll go to Dr. Sullivan.
Well, I think we've honed in on a couple of issues that are critical, and they're going to be answering them in spaces provided, and I think a cursory review of those responses could be done very quickly. And then a more deeper evaluation of the answers can continue, but I think Nancy has identified areas that we need answers in, or they're not in compliance. And those are maybe 2 or 3 questions. So an answer to everything is going to take time, but an answer to those 2 or 3 questions I don't think is going to take a lot of time.
I had a question. Have we checked with DCA to see if we know we have not received complaints, but has, whatever the area for the private schools over there, can we check and see if they've received ever any complaints on RBT schools?
So BPPE works with lots of boards and bureaus within DCA because they do private approvals for institutions, for degree granting institutions and non-degree granting institutions in the state of California. So they work with each of their agencies. So if a complaint is filed for a school that issues an RVT certificate or degree, they would report to the Veterinary Medical Board.
Yeah.
Now, if they haven't, I don't know they haven't, but that's the protocol.
Okay,
So-
so since we haven't gotten it.
Right.
Okay.
We have worked with the BPPE, I'm sorry,
Cal UMS was one where
Yeah.
we were in touch with BPP
right. And Ethan's talking about the school that came before this board in October of
2014.
14.
Yeah.
And wanted approval, and they had submitted an application to BPPE, and BPPE cannot approve the school unless they know the school has met our board-approved institution language. So it's circular, you're right, the one has to feed the other.
Yeah.
And they did come to us, so, I mean, no, and they, as far as we know, they dropped their application. They withdrew it.
Yeah, didn't they did not go apply to AVMA, right? Okay.
Members of the public, would you like to come forward at this time?
Sure. Alec Henderson, Veterinary Allied Staff Education, and just to give you a little bit of my background, I served 9 years on the RVT committee, and I was on a lot of inspections, school inspections, and I was actually on the RVT committee when we did this. There was a school in San Joaquin called San Joaquin Valley College, and we had problems with them, and their passage rate never got up about like 3%. And we followed that for about 3 years. And we finally put them on probation and then removed their accreditation. But what was happening at that time was there was a lot of the private schools who had extended their programs so they could become AVMA approved. And I was the program director at Western Career College, so I know for a fact that these things went on. And it was easier once you got your approval from AVMA because they thought once they got their approval from AVMA, they no longer had to report to the California board. And the California board was a little more stringent than AVMA. They didn't have any guidelines for approval, for passage rate on the state board or anything like that. So we came up with the idea because in the regulations it states that all schools in California teaching a curriculum in veterinary medicine or RVTs be accredited by the board. The board. It doesn't say AVMA. The board can abrogate that to the AVMA and take their findings, but they are still responsible for approval of all schools. Well, because we had this problem with that college, that private school, and other colleges, Western Career, for example, had gone AVMA, so they didn't have to report to the board anymore, or they thought they didn't. And it was thought by the board that to make sure that these private schools do comply and that we know, because AVMA does not keep a record on, or they didn't supply us with passage rates on the state board, then what was happening is that they were just skipping that step and just going along merrily on their way. So the board and RVT committee came up with the idea that we have those schools, all schools in California, because we are responsible for approving all schools. We would have all schools in California submit an annual report. There was no inspections. We didn't have to go out unless the school was not AVMA approved. We didn't have to go out and inspect the schools. We didn't have to do anything. But there were certain things on the annual report that they had to report. One was, did they notify students? What was their passage rate on the state board? And how many students had signed up for the program and how many students had completed the program. Simple annual report that gave us the information that we needed. It wasn't expensive, and that was what was in your regs, I believe, up until now, is that they submitted an annual report. We took the annual report and we saw what their passage rate was, we saw what we had to do, and if they had gone below 10% for 3 consecutive times, that they would be put on probation. And then we'd give them a certain amount of time to catch up, and if they didn't, they were lost their accreditation. BPPE, I'm going to give you an education here, is not what it is cracked up to be. For example, it takes over a year to get approved, probably. Not only does it take over a year to get approved, and I can tell you why that school dropped out. You have to have a facility, you have to have it leased, you have to have a lease, you have to have staff in place, and you're paying them while this is going through the application process, and that process can take up to a year and a half. There's not a lot of people can afford to pay rent or lease on a building for a year and a half, or pay staff if they're not getting any money. Plus, you have to have financials. Now, how do you get financials if you haven't started the school? It's really a bunch of hoops to go through, and it's not really that, and I hate to say it in front of the attorney, but it's not really that proactive for the students. We have to notify every student about BPPE. It has to be in our catalog that we tell them what BPPE is and where they have to go. If they have a complaint, they can file a complaint with BPPE. It's in all the documentation. It's given to the students, and you could go ask any of our students, what's BPPE, and they won't be able to tell you. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Well, you looked at option 1 and option 2 and you know what's existing, correct?
Well, I know what you put down here for option 1 and option 2, yes. And I know what's existing now. What exists now, I believe, is still what we put into effect, that they're responsible private schools who are AVMA approved. All private schools have to file with us anyway. If they're not AVMA approved, they have to file with the board. And that's, I think, the application that Ethan's talking about. If they are AVMA approved, they still should send us an annual report so we know what their passage rate is. And the annual report is not a big report. It's like I say, there's a few questions on it. They send it to us because that lets us know what the passage rate is in the state board, if they're notifying the students, what we need to do to protect the consumer and the student who is a consumer of those programs.
I may be missing it, but after reading this several times, I don't see any requirement for an annual report.
Well, I don't know what happened to that, but it was in the reg, unless it's already been dropped.
You've returned. I've returned, so I apologize, my copying skills are not what they used to be. I've never mastered the copy. So,
It's not in there anymore.
so what I have
You have to
before.
be college age like myself.
So what I have before you is some education code, and basically what it says that the enrollment agreement, which I spoke of, isn't not enforceable, and I'll pass this out in just a second, unless the prospective student has been given a copy of the student performance fact sheet. And if you can just in threes hand it, so it's in threes, there's 1, 2, 3, okay? And they've initialed it, and they have a copy and provided with a copy of the catalog. Like I said, my copying skills are somewhat lacking. So when you look at the document that I've handed out, it should tell you what's in the fact sheet, and I believe it talks about the number of students that's enrolled, how many have dropped out, everything you could ever want to know about how the school is doing. And that's a requirement upon enrollment for the student to be provided. Okay, so no enrollment agreement is enforceable unless, by the way, it's hot out there, when you ready to sprint to the other side.
Well,
Yeah, to the mothership.
BPPE, their application is 8 pages long. And since they have come back, into being in 2009, they have not had one successful application submitted by one institution since they came back the first time. Now that means that's
You're saying that a student doesn't have to go to the website?
What I'm saying is, in order to enroll and to execute the enrollment agreement, they have to be provided the student fact sheet, which you see before you, there's reams of data in there. Okay, and the second thing is they have to be provided a copy of the catalog. I can, like I said, my copying skills are somewhat suspect. I can read you what is supposed to be in the what's required to be in the catalog that they're provided.
This is what the schools have to provide
Correct.
prospective students
Correct.
before they're enrolled.
Before they execute the enrollment agreement.
So, Kurt, so to get to the point here of no new applications, but all the current, so there's 15 private, I guess,
Right.
on the RVTs. Under the rules here on the PPE, they must report this, they must give it to the students pre-enrollment.
Correct.
And that is already in place.
That's a function of not our law.
Right.
That's a function of the education code and the regulations derived therefrom.
And an RVT program,
But we don't know.
even if they have AVMA accreditation, if they're private, they also need to be certified by BPPE.
Approved by BP.
So you can't get around these regulations by being AVMA accredited only.
Nope.
So a consumer could complain to BPPE,
Yes.
and they have enforcement capability.
Yes, they do.
So I guess what we don't know is what, if these schools are complying with the BP. Do we know if there's a audit situation that PPE?
But we'll potentially know in October.
Annual report.
Yes, the annual reports due
An
then.
annual report goes to the BPPE every year.
Okay,
But that doesn't preclude what you're getting, because you're not gonna get that from the board. So if the percentage rate, which BPPE doesn't look at, they're there to protect the student, they've got the student recovery funds and all that stuff, but they are not really looking at what we were looking at and why we had to remove the accreditation from San Joaquin Valley College.
Could we get that report from BP?
Lee?
Thank you, Chair Nunia. I just want to be really clear, which I currently am not, on what's provided by and monitored by whom. And I'm also not sure, are we back on item 4C or are we on 5?
Sometimes we have gone back to.
Okay, because I don't want to comment on what we're not talking about, because I'm trying to follow your good guidelines about staying on agenda. And I'm really sensitive to the issues that Nancy's raising about making sure that students have the information they need. And ideally, they have it before they make the decision to enroll, because complaining after the fact, it's that old barn door closed after the horse is out. I don't know how much of that is our responsibility. We are a consumer protection agency subset. So I guess I would really feel much happier if I had clearer information about what we are currently doing in terms of a requirement, the kind that Nancy's describing. I think that schools are required to proactively hand people this information. I'm not sure when that's happening and what it looks like. If it's our requirement as opposed to BPPE, our meaning the Veterinary Medical Board, because that sounds a little bit different than what the BPPE is requiring as part of the enrollment process, which is a further step down the line maybe, versus what the AVMA is requiring. I don't want to create more work for staff, but can we streamline some kind of short overview of who's doing what under what set of requirements?
So what you're asking for is just an explanation of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, Kurt, so Ethan had said that on this application, item number 15 and 16 ensures that these programs are in compliance with the issues that Nancy brought up. Is 15 and 16 covered in the BPPE requirements? Is this a duplication of these?
Yes, if you look at the data sheet, if you look at the information, one of the things that has to be in the fact sheet is subdivision F, license examination pass rates. Okay, that's one of the things that must be disclosed in the past, in the performance sheet. And I'm sorry, Ms. Heller, just to point out, if I can just say, so there was a concern about what we did and what we do. Let me tell you what education says. So, a student, I'll just paraphrase, a student shall enroll in a college, a private one, or an educational institution by means of an enrollment agreement.
Mhm.
Sir, I don't know exactly who you are, but you're nodding, so I'm at.
Alec Henderson, Veterinary Allied Staff Education.
Okay, great. So an enrollment agreement is not enforceable unless all of the following requirements are met. Number one, the student has received the institution's catalog and the school performance fact sheet prior to signing the enrollment agreement. So that's all the information that's provided in the fact sheet that we just went through. And it's not, so prior to the execution of the enrollment agreement, the student and the institution have signed and dated the information required to be disclosed in the fact sheet. So clearly, if you enroll in a private institution, you are provided the information both in the catalog, which I didn't even got to yet, and the information required in the fact sheet. You're given that prior to the execution of the enrollment agreement, and you must sign and date that you've been apprised of that. So again, I'm not an advocate for my own work here. My concern is just the delta that's lost, and I just want to make sure that everybody wears it out. As far as the annual report, that's kind of a different matter. I'm focused on the consumer protection obligation as far as the student enrolling.
So what is the delta that has been lost?
I'm not sure that there is one yet, but that's just my.
Okay, so all of the requirements that the RVTC committee said in 2006 that should be met by these programs is potentially already being met by AVMA accreditation or by the BPP.
But the thing that I think Nancy's saying that I'm saying is, you're not privy to that. Unless you have BPPE send you a copy of their annual report, or have the hospital or the school send you a copy of their annual report, you're not gonna get that. So you don't know what the schools do. You don't know what BPPE does, and maybe AVMA does.
And the students.
But it's the student does, but that's not gonna help you to tell whether that school's performing at the level it should be performing, to protect the student and the consumer. You're abrogating that to AVMA and to BPPE, and it's clearly in the law that that's your job to accredit schools. It doesn't say the AVMA supersedes you. You authorize AVMA to go in and accredit, and you accept their accreditation stats. But you are still abrogating your duty if you're not looking at, are these schools following your criteria? Are they having a 10% passage rate? Are they doing the things that you want them to do as a school in California without going out and inspecting? You don't have to duplicate the inspection. But that's information that's important to this board if they're gonna perform what they're supposed to do according to the law.
Okay, I'm wondering if Kurt can give us a nutshell version of option one, option two, so that we can see crystal clear what the differences are between options.
Sure.
Not that I haven't read them, I even have notes,
Okay.
but do I really understand them? Not to vote on it, so can
Okay,
you do that
sure.
for us?
So
You-
the option 0 is to do nothing, right? That's option 0. Okay, do nothing.
Okay, no, go back, I'm sorry.
Option 0, just counting backwards, is like whenever you do a pros and a cons, or you do an action plan, option 0 is to do nothing, right?
Which I don't even know what that means, but let's.
Don't adopt the regulations. That's, okay, don't approve the regulations, that's option 0. Option 1, okay, is merely to say that if a school, we're talking about private since that's the new vote, if a school is approved by BPPE and they're fully accredited by AVMA, then they would be deemed approved by the board. Okay? That's option 1.
And is that any different than today?
Yes. Because
In what way?
In what way? Because they would no longer have to fill out an application to be approved, they would just be deemed approved.
Okay, all right, move on then.
So option 2 is more, not just a regulatory option, number 1. Option 2 is a statutory one, which is to go to the legislature and go have the statute changed to go the so-called clear path. Okay, that's all that does. It sets a little more framework around what the board is contemplating. Your prior council had a concern that there may be an improper delegation to AVMA to rely upon that without a clear path. I do not see that.
Okay,
But in respect for what went before me, I thought if the board was not that tolerant to the risk of this, they could in fact go to the legislature and say, could you clear the path, because we know what the purpose of regulations is. It's to implement, interpret, and make specific statute. Those are the two differences. One requires regulation, action part of the board.
Right.
The second one requires the legislature to act and then the board to follow on.
well, it's always best to do it in regulations, cause we have control over that than statute, obviously, and it takes so much less time, so that's one good reason for option one. I guess what I'm hearing is option one is fine, but what we need is we need to be auditing. We can never relinquish, obviously, our enforcement priorities. And so even if we say, hey, if they're AVMA and they're BPPE, that we approve them, but we have to be on top of them with auditing of their websites, their protocol, their processes, because we can't rely on, we can gather some of that information from the annual report, but it's also at the end of the day up to us to make sure that they are following the law.
I would agree with that, and just to set the record straight, Ms. Mancuso, you're exactly right. The enforcement of this isn't really so-called, I want to decouple that from approval, because even if they got
Right.
board approval, even if they got AVMA approval,
Right.
you still want to know what they'd be doing, right?
Exactly.
Okay? So that's not really an approval problem. That looks back, we look in the mirror, and that's an enforcement problem, or a monitoring or an auditing.
Well, it's about that delta you were talking about.
But there's no, assuming that, again, I talk a lot about linear stuff as we heard yesterday, assuming that a school does something wrong, isn't following the rules, okay? Does it matter what approval they got? No, what it matters is what we're going forward and what we're
Right.
gonna do.
Right,
In
correct.
fact, you'll see the regulation says nothing in this section shall be construed to prohibit the board from disapproving or withdrawing approval from, any program. So I don't see this as somehow we're saying, okay, well, once you get approved by AVMA, you're golden, you're.
Well, like Alex was saying when you were in the heat, he was saying years ago that,
When you were in heat.
yeah, that,
Oh.
well, he was outside and it was
Okay.
hot, So anyway, Alex was saying that years ago, though, that people schools felt that if they got this AVMA approval, then they didn't have any,
Connection to the board?
yeah.
Right.
Yeah. They were
So,
done with the
and
board.
that's just not true. So we're not delegating our authority or enforcement authority. That's just, they shouldn't think that at all, because that's not the case.
The approval method is fine. I mean, what you're talking about in approval, but the board is responsible to monitor. I would think you have to monitor and see what's going on, and you can't just say, well, they're AVMA approved, they're BPE approved, we're done.
So going back to this,
Yeah, yeah.
That's,
so going back to this delta, which is the loss of consumer protection, if we adopt option one, in regards to the enforcement of these programs, would you perceive that there would be a loss of consumer protection?
I don't perceive there to be a loss of consumer protection, because the monitoring and enforcement function is, to me, independent about how you got approved. And that's because once you get approved, I don't think the board says, in my opinion, okay, well, you're approved, forget it, you're done.
What's the mechanism of enforcement?
I'm
Currently,
presuming we are.
Complaints.
Currently, the mechanism of enforcement for the practice of veterinary medicine is the complaint process.
Correct, and just to take the bloom off the rose, we're licensing agencies, but we're also complaint reactive driven agencies. We go where the complaints come from. And so if a student says, I went to X school and all of a sudden there was no instructors and the instructor was an automotive mechanic trying to tell me how to do some veterinary procedure, I think that person would file a complaint, and I think Anne Marie's staff and board staff would take the appropriate action.
Dr. Sullivan?
It doesn't change the fact that the criteria comes from AVMA accreditation. if there's a violation to the AVMA accreditation and they don't follow up on it, we follow up on it. So once a complaint is filed, we're using the criteria that they established, but that's the grounds for us to enforce.
Kathy?
Yes,
Thank you. I have a question of Kurt, I think. Because I like consistency in the state laws somewhat, it would be nice. I understand his point about there's no requirement for PPE to report back to us, to give us their stuff. What do they do about the other private institutions that do other kind of licensed, I don't know, it could be auto mechanic, could be dental something or whatever. Is there any kind of connection to the actual board
Yeah, there is.
involved?
There is, and it escapes me, but I would have to go back and search. There was always a linkage between the two, because
Yeah.
most of what BPE is really after is both degree programs and non-degree, and one of the things that degree is, you're looking towards licensure. You're trying to get, I need to take a test to get this license, and so there's a linkage there, probably from my boiling my head in the sun. I don't remember what that is, but I can certainly report and get back to you, but there is a linkage, and if memory serves, some of the bureaus and boards within DCA have executed MOUs
that's what I was thinking.
with BPE to say, hey, let's share
Right,
information
right.
regarding the march towards licensure, because if you find something bad, gosh, we'd like to know about it, because we have a consumer protection obligation. These people could conceivably get out into the profession and do some
Right.
damage. We'd like to know about it.
So prior to it, yeah, that's what I was kind of getting
So I
at.
apologize,
Maybe
like I
there's
said, a little
a
flustered
good
after that.
linkage and an
100-yard
MOU
sprint.
that give us the info prior to any complaints, and we could do it proactively.
I really think it's even more important, since we've gone to the VTNE, to monitor those schools, because we, at one point, were giving the tests, so we had all the scores. So we knew exactly what each school was doing by the scores. And we could tell if they were providing students and giving them placement and whatever else they did. Now we've turned the state board now over to national, so we don't even have that control anymore. So we're just sitting out there and saying, well, we don't have to do this because it's cost us too much money. But at the same time, our consumers are the ones that are suffering, the students, and the potential for, yeah, exactly. So I realize how the board feels about regulation, because that's how I feel about regulation. I'd like as little as possible. But there are some things that we have to do, and I think this is one of the things that we can't just throw out the baby with the bathwater and say, well, we've got all these people around us that are taking care of it for us. We don't have to do it anymore. Thank you.
Dan?
Dan Segna, CVMA. I just want to make a quick comment to put some of the statistics that Nancy gave you earlier in perspective. I was an instructor at the RVT program at Cosumnes River for 5 years in the late 80s, and that attrition problem, which is a community college and AVMA accredited, still is, that attrition problem was exactly we saw. We were in exactly those same number ranges that Nancy listed earlier, and it went on for years while I was there. It continued to be a problem, and I think some of it was related to people getting into the program not realizing that it was in fact a difficult program. They thought they were going to pet dogs and cats, and it was going to be a wonderful time, and then they realized it was a very science-based program, and the requirements were higher than they were willing to put up with. So there were a number of reasons, I'm sure, why people left. Recently, at one of our RVT committee meetings, we had 4 people on the committee that are either affiliated with, instructing, or directing at RVT programs that are all board approved, and I think they're all AVMA accredited programs, both community college and private school, and they were discussing exactly the same thing. It continues to be a problem across the board for a variety of reasons. I mean, Anne Marie mentioned, people drop out of school all the time, and nobody knows, I don't know if there are any good statistics on it or not. So that continues to be a problem. Those schools are trying a variety of different methods and implementing different processes to try and minimize that problem. The other comment was about the number of people then that do graduate and how many of them take the RVT exam. And I'm not talking about passing, but actually apply for and take the exam. And I don't have an answer for this too, but all of the instructors, and I saw it in my time and I saw it with people that work for me, no matter how much you encourage them to go take the exam, they wouldn't do it. They've completed the program and they were avoiding the exam for whatever reason. They were afraid they were going to fail. They wanted to think about it a little bit more. They wanted to take a refresher course, but many of them just never got around to doing it. So I think that, just for your perspective on where some of these numbers are and maybe why some of that's happening. So
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Dan also, just really quick, corrected me since some of the schools that I thought were private or public. There's seven public.
Well, we were just discussing one of them we don't know. So there's
Oh, so one.
There's at least six.
Okay, at
out
least
of the
six.
19.
At least six that are public. The rest are private.
Dr. Nolan, did you have?
I was just going to comment that we do some monitoring, and we do hospital site monitoring. So we're not totally complaint-driven, and we've had 3 people now so far express some concerns from the public stand that maybe we should be looking to proactively do some monitoring once we get our reg issues solved. It's just my comment.
I just want to reiterate what I started with, and I agreed with Ms. Mancuso. Much better to go regulatory route than statute. Statute opens up a lot of things. And 2, if we vote for option 1, it's the same thing as we have for the veterinary schools. We're it's on that same line, and I think by what we've already quoted, it allows us to additional oversight than even what we have for the AVMA schools. So that's again what I think our best option. 0 is not a good option, and I think of the 2 we have, I think item 1 is the best option.
So going back to item 4C, we do have a motion and second to move forward with option 1. Again, just if we approve it, doesn't mean that it's the rule of the land. It just means that we're moving forward with the rulemaking process. Yes, Nancy?
I just wanted to mention that option 0 is not a do-nothing option. Option 0 maintains the regulation that we have in place, which just requires the schools to apply to California for approval, which lets the schools in California know that the Veterinary Medical Board still regulates them. Right now, the schools think that the Veterinary Medical Board does not regulate, or they did before you sent out the current application. For many years, as Alex correctly pointed out, when AVMA started approving these schools, they all went AVMA because California approval was more difficult. And they found it easier to be approved by AVMA. And the Veterinary Medical Board kind of dropped the ball after schools went AVMA and stopped wondering about schools that were AVMA approved and only were inspecting or paying any attention to the schools that were California only approved. 2064 was intended to correct that problem so that it would bring to the attention of the Veterinary Medical Board as well as the schools that California still regulates these schools. And you're saying that we should amend this, we should change it so that these schools are automatically approved, which means that they will no longer have to apply to California. And they will go back to the old situation where they think that California has no control over them, which I don't understand the purpose of that, is to save a few hours of paperwork in the office for which the schools are paying. I mean, there's an application fee, they have to pay it. Presumably the fee covers the cost of the looking over the application. If you think the current application that you've designed is a little too complicated, then you can simplify it. But I think it's really important that the schools are aware that they are still regulated by the state of California, and the only way that they will really be aware of that is if they apply and are approved by the state of California under the current regulation 2064.
Maybe we could add an amendment to the motion that would say that the schools are required to send us a copy of their annual report.
Which annual report?
The annual report that they have to file with the,
But not all of the schools have to file an annual report, because it's only the private schools that would have to do that.
well, then we could ask all of the schools to file an annual report that's provided by the board.
I don't think that's much different than what we're doing now.
Question?
I didn't know we were getting.
Judy,
We are after this.
Dr. Mancuso.
Okay, I need one more crystal clear clarification from her. This is option 0, option 1. Now that Nancy and Alex have both raised this, you know, you're good with what you got, and then we've got our option 1. What's the difference between where we are now and option 1?
Option 0 we're doing, right?
Yeah.
The option
been
0
set
is
down.
status quo. I just,
0 is current law.
correct, I think.
So what's the difference between that and option 1?
Right, so the thing is, right now, is that they're required to apply, and we have to review the application. And so this would just say, there's no need to fill out the application, no need for us to review it, because if you're AVMA accredited, fully accredited, then you're deemed approved. But I have to again decouple something, again, what the schools think, I'm not so sure that's a function of the regulation. That's a function of the board doing its job to say, hey, even though you've been approved by us through this way, or AVMA, we're still here.
Yeah.
So that, like I said, I can't really, as a lawyer, make that leap of faith that whatever I write in regulation is gonna somehow change the mindset. I can't get there from here, because that's really an enforcement issue, just like, you know,
Just removing the license.
It's an enforcement
yeah,
issue.
it's an enforcement issue, not anything else.
And option 1 says that you don't have to fill an application, but we still have the authority to remove your approval.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm trying to be very good about the process here. I've heard a lot of really interesting issues raised. It's been very educational, and it sounds like one of the things that we all think is important is that this board get as much information about the schools to make sure that they are fulfilling their obligations, which continue to exist regardless of what we do going forward, and that this is also, again, an issue about communication. So since we have a motion on the table, but we can sort of talk about mechanisms that might go with it, when these schools get their letter acknowledging their accreditation and the acceptance of that accreditation by this board, that letter can include a reminder of what their obligations are and what this board's enforcement authority is, which would help to address Nancy's concern that they're going to forget that they're ultimately responsible to us.
Do we have any does the board have any sort of mechanism in place, like random audits or anything like that, to ensure that these regulations are being enforced?
So right now, we always have retained the authority to do site inspections, but they're based on complaints. So it's complaint driven. This is no different than an individual getting a license. We do with hospital inspection, right? That's setting, we do that. Right. But for licensees, it would be like us auditing a random sample of licensees to make sure that they're complying with the standard of care. It's enforcement driven. So it's not to say that the board couldn't, as a matter of policy, do some sort of audit of schools on a set basis. I mean, I don't think we still have the authority to audit their information because we have enforcement authority over the schools. But to the extent that we do it as a matter of protocol, no.
Because I'm thinking something similar to random audits to see if a licensee is up to date with their continuing
CE,
education.
right,
Yeah.
right. And perhaps that's something that the board would want to consider adding into the regulation.
Okay. And that, we would have an opportunity to do that if we start the rulemaking process and add that on as an amendment.
Yes, you could.
So
it was my recollection that we, in no uncertain terms, decided we were not following the regulations we had. We were not approving schools. Is that correct, last meeting? And that the result of that was this application that we sent out. So now we're going back and we're changing the regs to say we don't need to send out an application?
After we just created it.
Okay.
Because, well,
Yeah,
because
because
we,
that would be a good answer.
because,
Tell you what the answer is.
because we feel that all of these requirements are being satisfied by either AVMA or by the BPPE. And we're concerned that it's duplicative and not a good use of allocation of staff time. There's some very serious and important concerns about how do we enforce it, and I think that's a very valid concern. And there's been some response to that we enforce it through the complaint process, but there's also been some proposals that we include some form of inspections or audits as part of any regulatory changes that we make, because I think that I don't disagree with those concerns at all. I am concerned that it took the better part of several weeks to put this together, and I'm wondering how long it's going to take to review 50-page applications times 19. That's a lot of pages, and is it going to result in a higher level of consumer protection? Is that delta going to be worth?
No,
the effort?
enforcement would. And auditing and enforcement is where the resources.
Which we still have the potential to do that as part of this rulemaking process.
The other thing we have to keep in mind, as I see this, it's going to take at least, I think, a year or two for this regulation to go through, and that this questionnaire application form is getting things started and getting us up to date until regulations can change. I don't see this part as being duplication. I think it's doing our job while we get the regulations changed.
So, yes.
And I agree with Dr. Sullivan on that. Question for Ethan. The application that we've sent out, is it almost identical to the types of questions that AVMA is asking? I mean, do we have the AVMA application?
I don't have it.
You've never seen it?
No.
Okay.
I mean, we did analysis of whether our requirements were similar.
Right, okay.
I just ripped it from the regulations, and those are the requirements, so we're asking.
So those are our requirements, yeah, I was wondering. Okay.
That's not one. Thanks, sir.
And potentially this application would have to be sent out every year.
I guess potentially. I believe there's, in regulation, there's a multi-year approval. 2 or 4 years, yeah.
Every 2 to 4 years.
Something like that, yeah. I have to look at the reg.
So then even if you staggered all the school, that's 5 a year.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes?
How difficult would it be to include wording that gave us access to some of this information, short of creating a whole new application, but giving us access to the BPPE information or the AVMA information so that, because I believe that we are not really privy to the information such that we can monitor if we wanted to. So
That's the memorandum of understanding that we talked about possibly creating between these organizations.
But it's not appropriate to put it in this wording for this proposed regulation.
No, and the MOU would talk more about official information. It would be, I can't speak for BEP's counsel, but the sharing of complaint information would be a little bit problematic because you're not gonna, you talk about the school, we're considering disapproving them or whatever, but you're not gonna give out raw complaint information because of privacy concerns or whatever. So there is some decoupling there, but
I thought it was really the annual report information, which
that
wasn't
information is
complaint.
public information, so that's not a problem.
I just want to point out one thing, it's okay, In section 2065.7 of the regulations, it talks about the board's inspection authority. And this is where it talks about the board shall conduct subsequent inspections every 4 years. It's not approval for every 4 years, it's when we can do inspections. It also talks about if the board believes that a school or degree program has substantially deviated from any standards of approval, including accreditation, that's part of one of the standards. For a period of 2 years, the approved school or degree program's yearly average pass rate on the exam falls below 10%. There's been a change that the board can essentially conduct another inspection or require the program, place the program on probation. So that's currently in the regulations, and we're not looking to change that.
But we're not looking at that either, that's 10% of the average pass rate for the state, right? 10%.
Well, it's 10% of the average pass rate.
Yes,
We don't know, because nationally, they're not passing at a 10% pass rate, period, across the country.
But the wording says it's within 10%
Right,
of
below the average pass rate, that's what I read,
Below the average
yeah.
pass rate. Again, we're not looking at that information though. I mean, we don't have access to it.
But it's not a function of approval. So this is we have to separate approval from monitoring. And the other thing is, when we say we're not looking at that, when we are posting these things on the website and we're asking for access to AVMA's portal to get this information, we are looking at it. Whether you want to, if the right word is codify it, or place it in your regulatory scheme, that you're gonna do that, that's an option, that you're going to monitor pass rates or it's there already. So that's more of an administrative function. Similar to what we talk about with inspections of the hospital program. We inspect hospitals not because necessarily it's complaint driven, but we have an inspection authority, and we also legislatively have an inspection mandate now of 20%. So, like I said, it's not completely out of the realm of possibility the board can do something from a monitoring standpoint. But in all other circumstance, approval and why you enforce or go in to inspect is complaint driven. So it's no different from other schools. I think what would be interesting if we looked at the kind of administrative structure of some of the other regulatory boards and how they monitor their schools. Because where I came from, we approved schools. We approved the paraprofessional of these professions, so speech pathology and audiology. So we worked with the BPPE, and I'm familiar with MOUs. We approved the school up front. We had inspection authority that allowed us to go into the school upon complaint, or if there was any failure on the part of the school to maintain accreditation, and we could go in unannounced, just to inspect. So that was usually driven by enforcement. It wasn't an ongoing monitoring program, and that was separate and apart from approval. So I see this as the same circumstance.
Yes, Nancy.
I think that what you're proposing to do right now is highly unusual. Section 2064 was worked on for a number of years prior to its final implementation date of January 2015. It went into effect January of 2015, but it wasn't until a few weeks ago that this board chose to finally implement it by sending out an application, or May 31st, when finally sent out the applications to the schools. And now you're already proposing to amend this regulation that has not even been enforced yet, for reasons of not wanting to duplicate things, but you have no idea yet exactly. You were concerned about how much time it took to produce the application form, but once the application form was produced, it doesn't need to be produced again. We don't know how long it's going to take somebody to review the applications, how complicated that is, how time-consuming it is, how much money it's going to be costing this board. And yet you're all so worried about all this activity that you don't even know what it is. I don't understand the rush to amend a regulation that hasn't even been enforced yet. Why don't you give this regulation a chance? Why don't you wait a year or two and see how it goes, see if it really is a problem, if it's duplicative of effort, if it's not worth the time, and then decide to amend it if it is.
additional questions from the board? Any additional comments from the board? Then I call for a vote then.
Dr. Nunez,
Yes.
option one.
Yeah.
We are voting on the motion that was motioned and seconded to pursue option one of proposed regulatory changes for the RVT school approval process.
Right, and Mr. President, if I may, you'll commence the rulemaking process.
Yes.
Dr. Nunez.
Yes.
Dr. Waterhouse.
Yes.
Dr. Nolan.
Yes.
Dr. Sullivan.
Yes.
Jennifer Laredo.
No.
Kathy Bowler.
That was good. Can I ask a question before I vote, or do you want me to pass and come back to it?
You?
Well, just the understanding, if we're voting on this is to start the process. It doesn't dictate this language exactly, and it doesn't inhibit us or prohibit us from adding additional.
It doesn't even, you're correct, it doesn't prevent you from modifying, it doesn't prevent you withdrawing, it doesn't
Right.
provide
Okay,
stopping, taking
perfect.
your tracks, doesn't.
That's what I wanted to, because we talked about a number of things to amend this with. Okay, then yes.
Where was it? Lee Heller.
Yes.
Judy Mancuso.
Well, Nancy made a lot of good points. It's like, I was around for 2064, and we spent the year of regs and all the work and time to get that on the books. And then what prompted us to do the application was that those people coming in front of us and saying, hey, I want to start a school and I don't want to be AVMA, so come on, vet board, give me what you got so I can get accredited. And we were like, we don't have anything. We got to go figure out how to do that. And then we did, and then we just got that together. What, is this not right?
Something completely different.
And then we just got it together, and then we just sent out this application. Now we're voting on something to change what we really haven't fully implemented. So
So is that a yes or a no or abstain?
I'm gonna go, I think I better just go no.
And the motion carries. And I'm gonna take a bathroom break right now.
I know.
We'll move on to item 6. Yeah, five was an
That was combined.
update.
That was combined.
There's no need for action on item 5, it was just an update. Item 6, the board package contains a letter from Senator Hill, the chairman of the Senate Committee on Business, Professions, and Economic Development, directing the board to discuss, develop recommendations for action, and to report back to the applicable consultants of the Senate and Assembly committees the issue of veterinarians reporting pharmaceutical information to pet owners. The request was made in response to testimony made by a member of the public during our sunset review process, and members of both committees felt that this was a matter of consumer protection. My initial impression is that I tend to agree, but also realize that any issue deserves serious research into the pros and cons of implementing regulations, so I would suggest that this issue be referred to the MDC as a priority issue. And it also includes a letter from the Lizzie Initiative that they were able to find Anne Marie's maiden name, which is Teglia down at the bottom.
There you go. You did that one.
So that impressed me. So, if there's not any questions, then I suppose I would entertain entertain a motion to refer this to NDC.
So moved.
Any further questions or input from the board? John's not here to say no, so any questions from the audience? Then we'll call for the vote.
Dr. Nunez,
Yes.
Dr. Waterhouse.
Yes.
Dr. Nolan,
Yes.
Dr. Sullivan,
Yes.
Jennifer Laredo,
Yes.
Kathy Bowler,
Yes.
Lee Heller.
Yes.
And Judy Mancuso.
Yes.
There's a member from the public that would like to make a statement.
My name is Salomon Stoop. Thank you for your consideration. I testified Sunset Review with the purpose of solving a problem. That's all I am looking for. I don't intend any other thing than that. I want you to know that this situation evolved because Lizzie was injected with an antibiotic that is long-acting, and it is standard practice, actually, to inject that antibiotic, and I'm specifically talking about Convinia. In case they want to sue me, I say that is Convinia, openly. At this moment, I'm not talking about anything about the laboratory, because in fact, the same laboratory makes a very good antibiotic, Clavamox, which helped Lizzie tremendously. So it's not any issue related to pharmaceutical laboratories either. I just request respectfully, as a consumer, that we experience the same situation that a person goes through at a pharmacy, where the pharmacist explains the risks and side effects and offers counseling, which can be waived by the patient, and the patient has access to the pharmaceutical literature. By going through this painful experience, I don't have anything against the veterinarian, nor against any veterinarian. I happen to love veterinarians. I have met some wonderful, beautiful human beings that are veterinarians. And I think that sometimes the lack of regulation on this issue makes the veterinarians victims of the situation. Because the fact that a veterinarian would have to explain the risks and side effects requires that the veterinarian be updated in any information related to this to the medications. I started to look for people that had gone through similar experiences, and that's how I found out that all cases where Convinia was injected, the pet owners or guardians or keepers or clients, how you call them, were not told that it is an extended release antibiotic. But most important, what that means if there are adverse reactions. What is, I felt powerless for 6 days because Lizzie had kidney disease and she was not going to be able to handle it. If I would have been told that it was an extended release antibiotic, I would immediately said no. But then I found out in all the cases that I got information about this, that the consumers were not informed of that detail. So, and then I started to learn about, in those interviews that I made, I started to learn about people that said that sometimes they had gone to the same veterinarian for years, and they had never received any pharmaceutical information of any kind about any medication. And then I learned, and this comes mostly from the side of people that had pets that had cancer, that many times the consumer had to remind the veterinarian about issues related to drug interaction. So I said, well, Sacramento, we have a problem here. There is something that needs to be addressed. And that's basically, what I am asking, that there be some protocol to take care of this issue. This issue is not about statistical outliers. This happens, it's quite often that happens. I am a little bit concerned with the reaction that I got from the CVMA. I sent them a letter because, they are part of the infrastructure. And I didn't send the letter because I wanted to first address them. I was having some issues in addressing the board. I wasn't getting the information that I was requesting. And, I had to send a letter to Senator Feinstein, and I appreciate that she and a member of her staff worked on this, because I wrote that I wasn't getting the information I wanted. So she wrote to me to get in touch with the CVMA, and I did. And I got a letter that says, open quotes, this has, when I was talking about the pharmaceutical literature, this has, open quotes, this has not surfaced as an issue of concern raised by our members, and therefore is not something we would pursue on behalf of our membership. So I respectfully, and this, I know that I'm talking to the board, but I know that they're sitting behind me, right? And I know that sooner or later, everybody will have to talk to everybody, right? I want to ask them to not to forget us, the consumers, please. It's a request. And I say this without any intention of being disrespectful or anything. Please remember that the consumer is part of the, of you being the CVMA. And I want to thank Senator Feinstein for taking the time of doing this. She's busy with a lot of stuff. I founded the Lease Initiative for Pet Protection, as some of you know. And I have been lucky because I have, at this moment, public support. People that want to, that are interested on solving this issue. And I ask you to please, if you develop protocol for solving this, to please include the word Lizzie on it, because it's a moral debt to her. She suffered for a number of days because there was no information provided, and it's a moral debt to a 5-pound dog. Thank you very much.
Mr. Stepp,
Yeah. Sorry.
the first thing I'd like to offer to you is my condolences for Lizzie.
Thank you.
I know that every one of us on the board have lost a beloved pet. I'm not sure if Kurt has. He's legal counsel, but they provide such source of unconditional love to us that when we lose them, I know how painful that is, so my condolences to you over the loss of Lizzie.
Thank you.
And I also want to thank you and tell you how much I admire you for bringing this subject to us. Before our meeting, I was talking to Anne Marie how much I really appreciated the fact that a member of the public felt so passionately about this issue to really pursue what you did, coming to our sunset hearing and right into your legislatures and what it has resulted in us, the board, taking very serious considerations on what you ask of us. And I admire you and I thank you for doing that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Salas, or Núñez, sorry. No. I appreciate your words. I mentioned on my letter to Mr. Senator Hill and Assemblyman Salas the fact that the Congress approved the Pets Act as a recognition by the government that pets are members of the family, because that is the message from that act that was passed by nearly unanimous vote in the House of Representatives, and I believe that the version of the U.S. Senate was passed by unanimous vote. And I appreciate very much the fact that I am living in a country where the lives of pets are so important, because they help us so much in so many ways. So thank you very much for your words, Mr. Núñez, and thank you to all of you. And to the CVMA, thank you for listening to my humble comment.
Okay. My name is actually Dr. Núñez, but maybe my married name will one day be Salas. Who knows?
There is that possibility then. Thank you.
So we are voted to add this, right?
Yeah, it's priority. Yeah. Okay. So moving on to agenda item 8, which is the legislative report. And these are our items of legislations that obviously we have a vested interest in. We currently have a board position on them, and so there's no need for action unless we feel we want to change our current position, but this is also sort of an informative session of where these pieces are going. The first one is SB 1193. This is basically where our sunset review, sunset provisions have been placed. It was taken out of its original bill because of issues related to the North Carolina business. We're obviously in support of this bill. It includes provision for board extension until January 1st, 2021. If you read your packages carefully, there's a typo in there on tab 8A, the one that has 3 different colors, where 4800C, B, this section shall remain in effect only until January, and then 2017 was crossed out and 2018 was put in, but it really should be 2017.
No, it should be 2021.
2021, I mean, yeah. Yeah. Because we were approved until 2021.
So just so we're clear, that it's not a typo because we produced the document, this is what's in legislation right now. So I contacted the committee to make sure that they recognize that the 2018, because that looks like an intentional insertion of 2018 and not 2021. So I was a little leery as to why the date was what it was, and they did confirm that they will make sure they get that amendment in there.
Because we don't want to do it all over again in a
No.
year. It also includes the university licensure, the drug compounding, clarification on implementation date of CE for antimicrobial resistance, and the cancellation of premise permits once delinquent over 5 years. Any questions on that?
I have a question on page 2, 4830, A2. It's a weird construct to me. To me, it should say regularly licensed veterinarians from other states in actual consultation, and then with who?
But there's another bill that changes the consultation language down the
Okay.
line. So, and this is legislative language, so, yeah. We don't have any control over how they say things
How they-
typically,
it's-
yeah.
It's
Awkward.
Yes, very awkward.
Yeah, but in SB 1039, right, in SB 1039, there is an amendment to the consultation language that was pursued by CVMA.
Can I ask a question? On page 7 of 8, on 4904, does this change your budget, Anne-Marie, or the wording that they changed here?
So this actually, I'll explain this, this is
Yeah.
this is kind of a perfunctory thing. The way our wording was antiquated according to the Department of Finance. So they contacted me and said, you have really unusual wording that we need to change, because it basically says that you have to pay all your expenses. So it's basically now available upon appropriation, which is how we get our money every year, is by appropriation of the legislature. So it was more of a conforming change, it's not something we orchestrated.
Just curious, okay.
Page 6 of 8, 4848.1. The university license, do they need to get fingerprinted?
Yeah, that's part of the typical licensing.
I didn't see that in.
I think it says, it refers to the section about fingerprinting. Well, no, 144 just says that all licensees within these boards are fingerprinted, so it's a general oversight. But I believe it says, let me find it. Yeah. I believe it's pursuant to, I think 4905 is fees. I'll find it for you, we'll move on, I'll find it.
And then second question under, it's the same area, under number 3, completes the approved educational curriculum described in paragraph 5. And is that, are they taking a new exam or is it a law exam?
It's neither, it's the curriculum that our out-of-state licensees would
Okay,
take,
that
yeah,
curriculum.
yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Any comments from the public? Current position is support. If there's no motion, then we'll keep that. We'll move on to the next item. SB 945, pet boarding facilities. Our board position currently is watch. Amended as of June 9th, 2016, this bill creates a statewide standard for the operational requirements of pet boarding facilities and facility operators. This bill is sponsored by the State Humane Association of California. According to the author, this bill would establish minimum standards for the care of pets while they are in boarding facilities, as current law is silent on animal and consumer protection relating specifically to pet boarding facilities. Pet owners who board their pets may be unaware that California law does not establish minimum standards for care for conditions at pet boarding facilities, such as quantity of food and water, limitations on the time pets spend in cages, veterinary care, or emergency evacuation plans. This bill would provide operators of pet boarding facilities with clear guidance, help ensure the safety and well-being of pets, and provide protection to pet-owning consumers. The disseminated analysis indicates that there is opposition from the California Retailers Association, who is requesting clarification to the bill to ensure the provisions of basic activities satisfy the requirement to provide either enrichment devices or activities. Furthermore, our members are concerned about Section 122388, which allows local municipalities to adopt additional standards and requirements for pet boarding facilities. We understand this is a restatement of current law, however, our members have struggled with a disjointed patchwork of requirements on various other issues. There was also a point brought up about
Well, you have the opposition letter and we don't, or am I missing something personally in my?
from the retailers,
Yeah.
California Retailers Association.
Yeah, I don't have anything except the actual.
Yeah, it's part of the analysis that I provided to Mark to give you guys an update, so I'm sorry. It's an analysis. And they don't think that's one that we printed, right, Nina? He's referencing an analysis. Yeah.
Yeah. So, we haven't taken a position on this one, but other than watch.
My only concern is that it is an animal issue and that we're not in their scope as enforcing it. Do we know who's enforcing this?
I wondered that too. Who enforces this?
I think animal control or local, I think it's local jurisdiction.
Yeah.
And right now, there are no standards.
There are what?
No standards.
Right. That's true.
I think some communities have standards.
Oh, yeah, maybe
For
so.
boarding facilities, city, county,
Yeah, they're pretty,
loose.
yeah.
The question I had also is if there was,
Sir?
if there's boarding facilities within a veterinary hospital, would those boarding facilities be part of a routine inspection? Henry?
I'm sorry. Would what?
If a boarding facility is within a veterinary hospital, that boarding facility would be part of a routine inspection?
If a boarding facility is part of it, if the animals are commingled and it's part of the veterinary practice, we inspect all of the facility. If it's a separate entity or there's a wall or there's a separate building, we don't go into boarding facilities because we don't inspect the boarding, we inspect the veterinary practice.
So if these standards are made for the boarding facilities, does that have to be added to our inspection checklist?
No, it's not our
No, it's
authority.
excluded.
Yeah.
It's
not
marked on page 95, oh, that's all 95 anyway. Yeah. Page 2, right. Veterinary practice are excluded.
However, pet boarding facility does not include city county procedures and the animal control agency, society, animal society, or the premises of the veterinary facility.
Okay.
Well, to your point,
To your point, Dr. Nunez, you have minimum standards when boarding pets at your facility, whether they're overnight or you keep them for somebody while they're on vacation, but a regular boarding facility does not. So it's not an even playing field. So, I mean, if we took a position, it seems like we'd want to support it just, to make it even. So, but if you don't want to because it doesn't apply to veterinary practice, I get that, but I'm supportive, obviously.
I would be watching, and I'm concerned about it's, I don't know if it's our place to, really have a position. The piece of it that I'm concerned about is the requiring enhancement, enrichment. It sounds like a good thing, but there are some dogs, you give them a chew toy, they're gonna eat it, and then who's paying for the surgery? If it's required to give them a chew toy and a dog is likely to eat it up and obstruct.
But couldn't enrichment just mean like throwing a ball to the dog for a little bit or something? Right.
It's,
I mean,
That's the problem.
It'll be difficult to So any further questions from the board?
No, that's true.
Any inputs from members of the audience? Our current position is watch. Unless there's a motion to change that, we'll move on. AB 2505, our board position is to support. This is a gruesome thought for dogs and cats being euthanized in CO2 chambers. This is a bill that will make that unlawful, and I'm glad our position is support. Any comments or questions from the board? Any comments or questions from the audience?
I'm glad we support it.
Hearing none, we'll move on to SB 1039. Our current board position is to support. It's a long bill, and I hope you didn't read all of it. If you did, I commend you. But on page 79 of the bill, it includes provisions to clarify when out-of-state veterinarian may attend on specific cases as a consulting veterinarian. The bill specifies that that a non-licensed veterinarian may not establish a VCPR with the client and shall not practice veterinary medicine in California at a future time unless the veterinarian becomes licensed. This was closing a loophole for out-of-state consulting veterinarians. And this is the bill that was sponsored by the CVMA.
Oh, shocking.
Any additional comments from the board? Any questions or comments from members of the public? Our current position is watched. No additional comments. We'll move on to
Current position is
support. Yeah, sorry. Our current position is support. Moving on to AB 1951, Salas.
That's where he
My
was
married
getting it
name.
from. That's who he spoke to, yes.
Yeah. Board position, watch.
But it's dead for the season, right?
It has to do with
Yeah,
animal
it's
cruelty.
already-
We should
Yeah,
support.
It's already dead.
But it's already dead.
Oh,
It's dead.
that's fine.
Some of these have recently died, haven't they?
Who wants to die?
AB
Right.
2269,
With the penalty, forget it.
animal shelters, research animals.
This one's on the move. This is a good one.
Our board position is to support once proposed amendments are incorporated. And these are the amendments that address CVMA's opposition that would have prohibited shelters from animals being transferred to the university for teaching purposes. It is the standard today for shelters to provide animals to UC Davis for teaching purposes where the animals receive vaccinations, they're spayed and neutered, and certain testing is done on them. It's a community outreach program for the,
What kind of testing?
Yeah.
well,
Oh,
testing for parasites, testing leukemia for these status.
It's not like the old days.
okay.
So you're talking sort of standard veterinary care
Wait, you're talking
prior
about
to
animals
rehoming
that are
rather than
alive.
laboratory
They're not
testing?
experimented on,
Right.
no.
So not laboratory testing, Judy, just the kind of school environment in which to practice normal veterinary care,
Right,
as in vaccinations and screening tests,
right.
correct?
They come in alive, they leave alive.
And a lot of this the
And
shelter
better.
couldn't otherwise provide, so.
Well,
Point
they
of
have
Say it
to
again?
participate.
The shelter couldn't otherwise provide a lot of
Oh,
these
okay,
services.
got it.
So these enhance quality of care for the animals, to
Quick
clarify.
point of clarity before we move on. The board didn't see this bill at its last meeting, so this position, as President Nunez stated, is a proposed position that we support with amendments. We haven't had this bill on our agenda yet, so this is new. I also, yesterday, I believe you were provided with a analysis of the bill, and if you don't have it, I have extra copies. it's probably in the stack of stuff with the MDC, but I will provide them to you here, and there's copies on the table. So the current version of the bill, as you have it in your packet, doesn't show the amendments, but in the analysis, because these are very recent amendments, if you want to pass this down, it talks about what the author has agreed to take as amendments. And if you look at page 4 of the analysis, it says author amendments, and that lists what amendments the author is considering based on, I believe, opposition from CVMA. So I don't know if CVMA cares to comment on any of that, but essentially there has been some negotiations between CVMA and State Humane Association regarding this bill. Come on down.
I'll just be real, is this on?
I think so.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll just be real brief. This bill had a lot of concerns for us, and both UC Davis and Western University and all of the RVT schools throughout California, because it would have limited their ability to access live animals and cadavers that are turned over from the shelters willingly. The live animals have enormous enrichment programs, which were very well pointed out. Dr. Pasco, Dr. Ilku, Dr. Terra, some RVT school representatives met with both Waldron's office and the judiciary consultant and the sponsors of the bill. Took an enormous amount of work, but the result was a very positive effort in trying to protect both the veterinary and RVT teaching institutions and the animals as well, of course, that they are used in a very humane way. And the most positive part of all of it is all of these dogs and cats are adopted out at the end of the programs and lead very good lives compared to what it could have been. So it was a good process, and all of the amendments were taken, and we are in full support of the bill.
So our proposed position would be to support as amended.
So moved.
I'll second it.
Any additional questions from the board? Any additional comments from members of the public? Roll call.
I was just going to point out that if you look at the support entities, it includes the Humane Society, Veterinary Medical Association, and HSUS. So it looks like it's been vetted by animal welfare organizations.
Okay, Dr. Nunez.
Yes.
Dr. Waterhouse.
Yes.
Dr. Nolan.
Yes.
Dr. Sullivan.
Yes.
Jennifer Laredo.
Yes.
Kathy Bowler.
Yes.
Lee Heller.
Yes.
And Judy Mancuso.
Yes.
All right, AB 1348, licensure applications military. Our current board position is to watch. This bill would allow veterans to apply military experience and training towards their licensing requirements, and would require licensing boards to post information on their websites informing veterans' ability to do so. I kind of make an assumption that applies mostly for RVTs.
Correct.
I'm not sure how that would feel in a DVM program, but our position is to watch.
That we're aware of in talking to the federal government. There are not training programs in the military for veterinarians, but there is some training available for RVTs.
Any questions or comments from the board? Any questions or comments from the public? Then SB 1230, this one, is this one dead? Yeah. Okay.
So sensitive.
Yeah, it was in regards to compounding issues. SB 1182.
Support?
This was, this is the bill that would make it a felony to possess ketamine, GHB, or some other drug that I'm not sure what it is, with the intention to commit sexual assault one, our board position was to watch. I think it's disgusting.
Is this on our list because you guys use these drugs in your hospitals?
We don't
Well,
use-
not all of them,
But
just
we don't
one of
use
them.
them with the intention to commit sexual assault.
Right, but not the other ones, just ketamine. Right, that's what I thought. Okay.
But, I mean, there is, I know that in China's trying to put a ban completely on ketamine. Because I read that
So much drinking.
ketamine is the most abused drug in China. Any questions or comments from the board on this? Any questions or comments from the public? Okay, then moving on to AB 2419. This one is dead. I wanted to be the chancellor of the new University of California. And finally, an update on the Pets Lovers license plate. The package contains a letter from Senator Hill that was very well written by Senator Hill, Chairman of the Senate Business Professions and Economic Development Committee, to the California Department of Food and Agriculture. Again, he's an excellent writer.
He knows the subject matter well.
He does. The letter outlines the history of the Pet Lovers License Plate Fund, its mission, and the challenges faced to get the program running. The letter requests for the beginning of a discussion regarding transfer of the sponsoring agency to the Department of Food and Agriculture. What?
Nothing. So I recently had a conversation with the Department of Consumer Affairs and the California Department of Food and Ag about the potential of transferring this program to CDFA. And we're helping CDFA right now understand the program. So there will be some information I'll need from Ms. Mancuso as far as history, which it's okay for you to provide that, like geographical studies and what have you. But they are interested and they are considering this, and they've asked a lot of really good questions. So we're in the process of hopefully making that transition so the program can get off the ground. I think it's fair to report that there's over $700,000 in the Pet Lovers Fund today. So it's a very healthy fund, and hopefully it will get where it needs to go very soon.
By the way, Anne Marie wrote the letter. Senator Hill said, "Let me send to you what I've written already, and you can write the rest." And what he wrote was, "Dear Miss Ross."
Actually, it was Bill Gage and I worked on the letter, but because we had most of the history on our side, it was easy to plug in the information. And quite frankly, I feel compelled to help this along, considering that it's been out there for a long time. We got a lot of money that needs to go to its intended purpose. So I'm happy to continue serving in that role to see what needs to happen. But thank you for embarrassing me.
Okay. All right. Moving on then to item 9, Board Chair report. So I usually take this time to just talk about activities of the board in between meetings. As you heard before, we had an expert witness training May 4th and 5th in Sacramento. We had our, June 20th, we had the Physical Rehabilitation Task Force meeting, which I'll give you a brief report on that. June 23rd, I attended the CVMA Joint House of Delegates Board of Governors meeting in San Francisco. This Friday, Anne Marie is going to be attending the CARFTA conference. That's in Sacramento. It's in Sacramento at UC Davis. There's going to be another hospital inspectors training program in August, and in September 22nd through 24th, it's going to be Kathy Bowler and Dr. Waterhouse and myself and Anne Marie are going to Scottsdale, Arizona, to attend the AAVSB annual meeting.
Road trip. In jest, there's a lot of work to be done there, but it will be nice to have the complement of the board there to address some of these issues that are not just unique to California.
Yes, including the discussion on physical therapy. So, in regards to physical therapy, we had our first task force meeting, and we had it in this very room, as a matter of fact. And as you know, the task force was created at the request of the legislature as part of the board's sunset review process. And the charge of the task force was to further examine the issue of animal rehabilitation and to present recommendations to the board in January of 2017. If you recall, at the last meeting, the task force was comprised of representatives from a variety of stakeholder groups. And I thought it was a very, very good group of people that attended. I thought the group worked well together. On the items that we did vote on, we voted unanimously, so that's a good start. The meeting was podcast and archived, so if you'd like to see the meeting in its entirety, you can visit our website. Much of the initial meeting was spent on orientating the task force members on the objective of the task force, the mission and vision of the Veterinary Medical Board, and a review of the applicable statutes and regulations. I thought it was important to do that because the task force members really are not familiar with the Veterinary Medical Board, what our purpose is, what we can do and what we cannot do. So I thought it was important that they knew that before they made recommendations for what we should do. There was a consensus on the definition of rehabilitation, and the definition that came out was that animal physical rehabilitation is defined as the treatment of injury or illness to address pain and improve function by means of physical corrective treatment. The task force members also agreed with the concept that if physical rehabilitation was performed abiding to this definition, then it would be considered to be within the scope of practice of veterinary medicine, and therefore would require the establishment of a valid VPCR and a diagnosis and prescription for treatment by a licensed California veterinarian. There was also agreement on the treatment modalities performed. There was also agreement that if the treatment modalities performed was other than this, in other words, if they were for wellness or exercise purposes, then they were not considered to be aspects of animal physical rehabilitation. So if you're going to do it with the intention of what that definition was, then it's the practice of veterinary medicine and requires a VCPR, a diagnosis, and a prescription for treatment. But if you're doing it with the purpose of wellness or exercise, then it's not. And we didn't feel that we needed to go into a specific list of modalities of massage or this and that. We just felt that the definition was sufficient. And that's all we had time for at that first meeting. The next meeting is scheduled for October 4th. And some topics for the next meeting is to take up the title of the practice because it was tabled, and we didn't really adopt that official title. Other issues are education and training requirements, logistical operational challenges to include information on the North Carolina issue, and also we hope to bring back information from the AAVSB, what we learned there, to bring to the task force.
May I add anything, Chairman?
Yes.
I want to say a big thank you and acknowledgement to Dr. Nunez, who I think was an exceptional chair of this task force meeting. It was really well run, it was very organized, it moved forward well, and people worked together very well, and I attribute a lot of that to Dr. Nunez's leadership. I also want to say I thought everybody in that room was really there to try to work hard on coming up with a successful way to regulate this area of practice, and I appreciate everyone who was involved in that.
Yeah, and I would also say that the task force does have to abide by the Open Meetings Act, and those rules were laid out. We were orienting task members, and so there was a lot of talk before the meeting started, but I hear that there hasn't been much talk between members. So everyone is playing by the rules, and that we know of. Okay. Any questions? Any questions from members of the audience? Okay. The next item is our new item, the RVT report from Jennifer Rito.
So just some updates on some things. Anne Marie had extended an offer to attend the CARPTA conference that's tomorrow at UC Davis.
Wait, can you?
Can you hear me now?
No?
We need to get closer.
Are you hearing me?
Turn her up.
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
There you go.
Okay, so as Dr. Nunez mentioned, Anne Marie is attending the CARPTA conference tomorrow at UC Davis. Some of the issues that she'll be addressing are the process for moving the pending RVT regulations toward approval, how the new RVT report, this report, will enhance keeping RVT issues moving forward, and how the board intends to enforce Section 2064 of the Code of Regulations, which is the approval of schools accredited by the AVMA, and what the process is for assessing the appropriate fee for the RVT exam. In addition, Anne Marie will be updating the CARPTA board on pending policy and regulatory discussions before the MDC and the board, status of the new veterinary assistant controlled substance permit category and the rollout that's coming up, extended functions for RVTs. That was mentioned today by Dr. Klingborg, saying that after reaching out that there might be some additional duties brought forth. I'm confident that there will be. Drug compounding regulations and animal physical therapy policy considerations. So some other topics for discussion possibly would be, as we discussed today, enforcement of RVT school requirements and the possibility of researching how other regulatory agencies approve their schools and enforce those policies. So
I think that's a very important issue, enforcement of the RVT schools.
separate from approval.
Separate from approval. Any comments or questions from the board?
I like the RVT report. I think it's a good addition. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. And welcome back.
It's my minute, so.
Any comments or questions from the public? Yes, Nancy.
Not about the report, public comment.
Are you in public? The next item?
I'm on the next item.
Okay. Any questions from the public in regards to the RVT report? Okay, now moving on to the next agenda item, comments from the public. Not on the agenda. Public comments not on the agenda.
Well, my first public comment, which is sort of related to something that is on the agenda, is I could request that you move items 18 and 19 to today, so the rest of us public don't have to come tomorrow. Since it's 3:30.
I don't, they're not,
You're not prepared?
no, they're not.
Okay. Then I'll move on to the two issues that I wanted to bring to your attention. It has come to CARV's attention that there are foreign graduate RVTs that really have no simple way of becoming eligible to apply for the California exam. Currently, the only foreign graduate RVTs who have a legitimate pathway are those who live in Canada or licensed in Canada. But we get inquiries from people who are RVTs in England, Australia, Mexico, who have, sometimes they're foreign graduate DVMs. There used to be an eligibility category for foreign graduate DVMs that was eliminated. There used to be a category for people who had a 4-year degree in an animal-related science, and that was eliminated. So currently, there is no way for these people to apply for the RVT exam in California, other than for them to start all over again and go to RVT school. So I would suggest that this is an item that should be discussed at the MDC, and we should come up with a logical way for these people to be considered, because we have a shortage of RVTs. And the most recent candidate was a woman from England who is even board certified in the United States in a specialty, because apparently England recognizes American specialties. She's been an RVT, or what they have a different title in England, but she's the equivalent of an RVT. She's been one for a long time. She's obviously a superior candidate, and yet we have no way of getting her licensed, and we certainly want to consider people like that. My other concern is about the AAVSB. I brought this up at a previous meeting, and there was a motion passed about the board writing a letter to AAVSB about the fee increase. I don't know what's happened with that, but have other concerns as well. It's come to our attention, as I mentioned earlier, the pass rate on the most recent exam was only 50%. Candidates are complaining that there are too many large animal questions. Now, we've heard that a lot. We heard that when I was on the RVT committee. We heard that a lot. But we responded to that, those complaints by surveying the population of RVTs in California when we did the practice analysis. One of the questions on the practice analysis was, what type of practice do you work in? And we developed statistics based on those answers to how many RVTs were working in large animal, small animal, lab animal, shelter medicine. And we ended up creating the exam based on those percentages. So 75% of the candidates were RVTs in California were working in small animal practice. We made 75% of the questions small animal questions, and et cetera, et cetera. So I called the AAVSB. Well, first I wrote them an email to ask this question of them, and I got no response, so I called them. I spoke to Nancy Gritman, who's in charge of the VT&E, and she said she didn't know the answer to that question. But the question I asked was, do they do this? Do they have a percentage based on the practices of RVTs in the country? And if they don't, would they consider doing so? And she said she didn't know the answer to that question. She would get back to me. But it's been several weeks now, and she hasn't gotten back to me. I called her again last week, and she's out on vacation. So I have no answer from AAVSB. So I'm requesting that, especially now that you're going to the AAVSB conference, that this is an issue that you bring up to them. And when I mentioned it to some other people, other people are hearing the same thing, that there are too many large animal questions, or there are questions on species that are not common in California.
Yeah,
It's a national exam, but when in California, when we were putting together our exam, we didn't allow questions on species that were not in California. And it may be that the AAVSB has to consider not having questions on species that are not common to every jurisdiction.
You know, last year, I was part of a focus group with the AAVSB and the National Veterinary Medical Examiners. They were in the process of conducting the practice analysis survey that they use to actually make the examinations. And so in other words, they send surveys out to a lot of different people in the United States and Canada to get an idea of what is being practiced in the field of veterinary medicine today. Because
So,
the purpose of...
I'm sorry, Mr. President, I hate to be.
Oh, you're gonna...
Right.
I'm going to rule on this and suggest
Yes,
discussion.
you're not supposed to be responding to me.
Right, so
I'll tell you at dinner.
Okay, all right, and then
The only other thing, the discussion can be whether you want to put this on the agenda for the upcoming meeting, or I'll even bend a little bit and say on the MDAC agenda for October. So that's a discussion the board can have, not on the merits. Okay, so
But I think you can answer questions about the letter.
you can answer a question about the letter, yes.
The letter did go out and a copy went to CARFTA.
just recently.
Yeah, it's not been too long, but the
Okay,
letter
so,
went out.
okay, so I probably haven't seen the letter yet. Then there were other comments about the exam construction itself, that there were a lot of questions that had none of the above or all of the above as answers on their question. And as someone who's been involved for many, many years in writing our exam and been propagandized by our Office of Exam Resources, we were never allowed to write those type of questions. We were told that those were not, it was not an acceptable type of question. And yet there are apparently quite a few of those type of questions on the VT&E. So I think this is another issue. We used to have somebody from California who was on the CVTEA. I don't know that we do anymore.
Your first point about the foreign graduate, them not having the ability to get registered, is that an issue the California board should put on its agenda, or is that more of a national issue?
Well, we have a regulation for a way for foreign graduate veterinarians to become licensed in California. I think we need a way for foreign graduate RVTs. Well, whether or not we need a program, a national program or not, is something that we need to discuss. I mean, what I think this is an issue for the MDC to decide if their education is sufficient to, I mean, depending on where they come from, we may want to say English-speaking countries or whatever. There are different ways of looking at it, and I think it's something that should be explored by the MDC. I don't know what the answer is.
Okay, so I don't think that we can adopt similar regulations for RVTs.
Well, but they may not need to be similar.
For them to pass, is that right?
Yeah, I think we probably have to put it on the agenda
Right,
because
doesn't.
it really comes down to how would we view the education and training
Right.
from that foreign territory more
Right.
than, and that's what PAVE and ECEFG does, ABCDEFG does for veterinarians. So if we don't have that kind of national credentialing system, and Kurt's gonna give me the cane in a minute, we need to put it on the agenda.
I'm particularly considering the English-speaking countries because I don't see that there's a big distinction between the education in Canada or in the United Kingdom or in Australia or New Zealand as there is in the United States. So those were my issues. So.
They sound like agenda items.
Go straight to the MDC.
Respectfully and theoretically, but since the NBC is so closely linked, I think it would be permissible for the board, and since the NBC has sent answers to the board, they do what the board, I think the board can say it's on the next NBC.
Well-
Sorry, I got my ECF and G all goofed up, so.
I know, and just all due respect, council, I don't know that we can say it'll be on the next MDC agenda because the agenda may already be packed, but it'll be on a future MDC agenda.
Yeah, I think it's an open issue.
Okay.
Okay, so that the foreign graduates going to the MDC and then hopefully you would be speaking to the AAVSB about these issues when you see them, at least, or send them a letter about this issue, about these exam issues, about species content, and whether using all the above and none of the above are legitimate types of test questions.
Can I ask that whatever letter you sent to the AAVSB, you forward to the board so that when we're there, we can share your concerns?
I just sent an email. I can send you the email that I sent.
Or it'd probably be helpful.
Or you
if
want me to
sent
say,
a
I can send
letter.
you a letter.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that way we're communicating what the concerns are from the professional association. Again, just remind you that, we have to represent where those concerns are coming
Okay.
from. They're not from the board.
Okay.
But we've heard this in California from the professional association that these are concerns.
I will do that. And when is
We sent a letter on the exam fees already.
when is your AAVSB meeting?
The 22nd through the
Of-
24th of September.
September, okay. I will have you a letter before then.
All right, thank you.
Do I have to give my name again?
Yes?
Okay. Alec Henderson, VAS. My comment is about the AAVSB also. When we went to the national exam, we went to the national exam under the auspices that it would save California a lot of money, and therefore it would be more reasonable for the student or the person taking the exam, because we wouldn't have to have exam review, and we wouldn't have to have question writing, and we wouldn't have to have all these schools that we had to have to put on the California exam. And when they went to, and then all we'd have to have is a 50-question jurisprudence and law exam, or jurisprudence and radiation safety, something like that, exam, which would only be 50 questions. Well, since we've gone to AAVSB, our fees have gone up. It's $300 for the California exam, for the 50-question exam. It's $125 for the fee, and $175 for the exam fee, which is $300. If they had to take the exam again, second time, at one point we said we would reduce that by the $125 application fee. We wouldn't put that on, but now it's come back on again, and it's back onto the $300. Also, AAVSB was $300, but they've now increased their fee by another $10, which now it's $610 for these poor students, and most of the veterinarians up there know that they're not that well paid. But they have $610. Well, we just had a student apply, and normally what they do, because AAVSB only has certain windows during the year, California, they can take it anytime once they're approved. We've encouraged the students, as we were told to begin with, to go ahead and apply for California and at the same time apply for AAVSB so they can meet that window requirement. Well, AAVSB has changed their thinking on that too, and we have a student now who applied on May 19th, and it's taken a little longer. I don't know, there may be a problem in her application, I don't know, but it's taken a little longer for the state to approve her application. And because the state has notified AAVSB and she's applied for the July-August window, they sent her a letter last week telling her that she did not qualify now because she's forfeited her July. She can only apply for that one window. They won't move it forward to another window. So she loses the $310. They have said that she has forfeited the $310, and for her to take the test now once she's approved, she'll have to pay another $310. And I think this is wrong. If she had taken the test, or if she had just forfeited the test, she had been approved and didn't take it, I can understand that. But circumstances are not allowing her, and then why couldn't they move it to the, I don't know. That's the problem. That's what I'm asking you to check into when you're at the AAVSB. As I mentioned to Anne Marie, that I had applied to go to AAVSB too, but they won't allow outsiders anymore. So, or I'd have asked that question. But it's really a shame that they take the money and they haven't taken the test. They really haven't lost anything. They could have sent a letter saying, you've missed this window, we're going to apply to the next window, or a one-time move or whatever, and allow that to take place. But they didn't. They just sent her a letter, and she didn't even know this was going on because she hadn't heard from the board, but she figured that was okay because when she does hear from the board, she'll get the letter once, because you guys notify the board, I guess, AAVSB right after you approve. And when she told me this, I didn't believe her, and I went onto the internet, and I saw her application here said open, which meant that we're still working on it, I guess. And her application for AAVSB, they just sent her an email and told her she had forfeited her fee. So if the board could do something about that, I mean, here we go to the National to save money, and it's costing like almost $1,000 for this gal to take the test, so. Thank you, whatever you can do.
All right. I thought we were gonna have fun at the beginning.
Same situation had happened to one of the girls on my team. She just told me about it. It reminded me. And it was actually a mistake by the AA. It was actually a mistake. It was the same situation. She contacted the AAVSB and they had made a mistake. She did qualify, but they told her that she was going to have to forfeit her $300 or whatever it was, and that prompted her to look into it. So I don't know if this is common. This is the second time I'm hearing about it in a week's time.
Jennifer mentioned the veterinary assistant controlled substances permit. I know there were some breeze issues in getting it started. Can you give us an update, and is there a target date for implementation?
It's on our agenda tomorrow.
Oh, tomorrow.
For the purposes of the audience, Ethan, do you want to, can we do that? It's a staff report.
Okay, so we'll allow a real quick, and I want to reassure, this is a very limited time reserved on the agenda for a very narrow subject. So to the extent we engage in discussion about things, my heart rate and heartburn accelerate quite a bit to the point I may need some ketamine pretty soon here. So please, let this be, the proper response is I have an issue. The board's response is we determine whether we're going to put it on the agenda to talk about at the next duly noticed meeting. So, Mr. Mathis, if you can answer this question quickly, and then the board will be reminded of sort of the purpose and the scope of this item on the agenda.
So one of the tenets of the VACSP's regulations, which are moving forward through OAL, we're anticipating some kind of response from them towards the end of this month. Nevertheless, we're shooting for September, mid to late September, to begin the ability to issue licenses. All things are falling into place. The breeze system's been set up since we went live in January on the 19th. It was just turned off. It was not available to the public to actually apply. So it's one of the steps we're going to do to get the license type rolled out, hopefully in September.
Yep.
All right.
Hmm?
Any additional comments for items not on the agenda?
This is a comment about an item on the agenda. Is it possible to move the executive officer report and other agenda items above the closed session so that those of us who would be attending can leave earlier?
Regrettably, no. The time established certain for numbers 15 and 16 petitions must be.
Yes, I mean, move 17 to after 19.
Okay, I had a different thought, and that is if the members will indulge me in order to compress the time on 17 tomorrow, conceivably what the board could do, if it so chose, was to tackle the non-petitions discipline today. And that way, hopefully, other stuff. Okay, never mind that.
Nancy, what it is there's closed session after the petitions. That's part of the petition is the closed session.
So do you have an estimate of what time the open session would start?
I don't know how long the petitions are going to take.
Makes it a bit difficult to attend.
I mean, I could give you a time, but it would be a shot in the dark, so I don't want to do that.
Can we flip them from now on for people that come, like Nancy and others, that we do closed session like late and open first or something, just for future meetings?
Yeah, we have the discretion to do that. The only time where it becomes difficult is when we have petition hearings because we have the judge here. So we have to accommodate the judge. So in this case, we wouldn't have been able to flip them.
I mean, So that means either we sit out in the hall for 2 hours waiting for you to finish, or we miss the meeting altogether because we don't know what time to get here, so.
That's, I don't think there's anything we can do about that regrettably.
So, right, so as far as 13 and 14, when we start again, tomorrow, that'll be open session. And then 15 and 16 are open seriatim for open session. And then the board will go into closed session to knock out, since we have the judge here, you'll more than likely consider the two petitions because we're paying for the ALJ's time. Then we'll excuse the ALJ and then tackle the regular discipline. So I don't know when that'll end, but the thing is, when you set the agenda, since you're essentially reserving the time for both petitioner and the judge, those times cannot be altered. Yeah, so.
And usually when we don't have petitions, we do the administrative reports first, and then closed sessions at the last part of our day. But this time we can't do it because of the judges. Any additional comments?
And, I mean, there's absolutely no way to do that today. Just 18.
We don't have the staff down here to do it. We have a hospital inspection report. We have the budget report that's still. Diane Sokoloff isn't here, so.
Do you have the licensing and examination report available?
Nancy, we're not prepared to do it today.
All right, we're going to recess until 9 a.m. tomorrow. No one has homework tonight except for Kurt. Kurt has homework tonight.